For decades, the history of the DC Universe has been marked by its crisis-level events, status quo-altering storylines that have rewritten continuity while also providing a meta-commentary on DC Comics publishing itself, and all under a signature red glow. This is Red Skies, a 13-part podcast epic mining these events and the Superman of it all. Welcome to Digging for Kryptonite, a Superman fan journey. I'm your host, Anthony Desiato. This is Red Skies, Chapter 9. And joining me to discuss Flashpoint and Flashpoint Beyond, both written by Geoff Johns, returning guest, real-life Lobo cosplayer, Justin De Voe. Welcome back.
I've been so excited. I'm trying to catch up because school just started again. I just listened to you and Sean from Fat Moose. That's always fun. Dude, it's so good. Like, I got to switch my personalities with the guests that you listen to. Like, I know Sean's going to come on with like a lot of sarcasm. I know a lot of other people come on with like all the notes and stuff like that, but I've been waiting for this one. As soon as you asked me, and I made the joke, it was like, if Sarah asked me to do something, I'm like, yeah, but I got this other stuff to do. If my mom's, you got to help me. I was like, yeah, but I got to do this other stuff first. When you're like, do you want to do a show? I'm like, when? Just give me the time. I'll move stuff around. Of course, it's partly facetious, but only partly. But I'm excited.
No, listen, I appreciate that. And that's a great opportunity for me to issue a thanks. I always thank the guest and I always thank the audience, but there is another group. I do really want to thank the significant others, in particular the wives and the girlfriends of the guests who come on here, because as the audience knows, these can be pretty epic recordings and we're doing them at night. And a lot of times it's over the weekend. And I know as well as anybody how precious any time is, and especially family time and all of that. So I always appreciate the significant others who let me borrow their guys for these for these recordings. It means a lot.
Yeah, before you came on, she leans over, so sweet, and she goes, I just want to let you know, like, I have work to do too, so I know you guys can go on for a long time, but like, she was totally understanding about it. I said, don't worry about it, I get it. Especially this one. Like, we can do shit. I can break night doing this one into tomorrow morning based on the storylines and the connected storylines. Not so much the button, but we'll get into that too. I'm excited. So where do you want to start? Like, I'm ready.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you here in particular because I know what a fan of the Flashpoint world you are, and I want to get into all of that. Look, for people who are listening, you didn't just see, but Justin held up a custom Martha Wayne Joker sneaker, and it's incredible.
Which, by the way, I would be remiss. My sneaker guy is Eccentric Art, ECENTRIK on Instagram. His name is Elam. He's the sweetest dude in the world. They all come white, and he custom paints everything. So you could be like, I want giraffes and jaguars, and he'll make it happen. He made all the shoes for my wedding party. So like, I go to him for everything. Yeah, but you got to check that guy out. He's super talented.
Very cool. Very cool. So we're at an interesting juncture now in this Red Skies event. Now, peeling away the stories that led into or led out of the Crisis events and just drilling down on the Crisis stories themselves, as everyone knows, we have the original Crisis in 85. And it's not until 20 years later, 2005, that we get Infinite Crisis, the true direct sequel. And yes, in the interim in 94, we had what I kind of call Crisis Light in the form of Zero Hour. It was there. It was there. It's got Crisis in its subtitle and all of that. And it gets referenced here, and Hyper Time makes a return. We'll talk about all of that. But essentially, you have Crisis, the 20 years later Infinite Crisis. And then very shortly thereafter, in 2008, we have Final Crisis, which you haven't heard this episode yet based on when we're recording, but I had such a change of heart and perspective with respect to Final Crisis. I'm all in on Final Crisis now. I love it now. I get it in a way that I didn't before. And, in the past, I was always kind of flip about how it was even called Final Crisis, because of course there will be more Crisis events. But I feel like
we just had the Dark Crisis. It seems like they throw Crisis on something and it's like, we're going to buy it and shit. So, yeah.
Yes. But I think in terms of what that story was doing and the themes it was tapping into, I think it earned the title Final. And in fairness to DC, they did wait until, like you just said, Dark Crisis, very recently before the word Crisis came back.
Almost, 15 years ago or 15 years later, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. However, in between, we had other Crisis level events, even if they didn't have Crisis in their title. And we're starting here with 2011's Flashpoint, the 5-issue miniseries by Geoff Johns and Andy Kubert. At this point, I can't imagine there's anyone who's unfamiliar with the story because it's been adapted in the CW television series. It's been adapted into an animated movie. And as you and I discussed at great length not too long ago, it was also part of the basis for the blockbuster, and I put that in quotes, Flash movie.
It was hot as a baby in an oven or a baby in a microwave.
Yeah, it's crazy. No babies in microwaves in the original source material. All right.
No.
I got it. I mostly got it out of my system. I'm sure it will come up again, but honestly, I really made a specific point to myself. I was like, listen, you tore that movie apart for 2 hours when we did that other episode. So I'm not looking to further belabor the point or antagonize anyone. So
I know I just like to push your buttons sometimes.
It might seep in here and there. There's at least one point where I know it will, but for the most part, I'm not trying to relitigate the movie. I've said my piece on the movie. It's funny though. Our buddy Zach Moore from the Always Hold On to Smallville podcast earlier this evening, he sent me a link to the Flash movie deleted scenes, and I was like, you know what? I wrote back to him. I said, I can't watch this before we record because if we do, then I'm just going to come into this and I'm going to be all fired up again, and we're going to spend a half hour on the Flash movie. So I was like, God. I'm just going to wait.
Dude, man, I got to see these now because if the stuff that was in the movie, the train wreck, got in, I don't know if I want to see the stuff that didn't make it in. But you're right. Like, we can easily go down that track and lose everything.
Yes. But in terms of the comic, the original comic, the source material, again, the recently returned Barry Allen wakes up in this alternate timeline, powerless, only to find his mother is alive and the DC universe that he knew is completely askew. And he, of course, assumes that this is a result of the machinations of the Reverse Flash, his arch enemy, only to find that, in fact, it was Barry all along. And like we said, that's been the basis for numerous adaptations. Most importantly, though, in terms of this event that we're doing, this led to the New 52 quasi-reboot publishing initiative that DC followed for a number of years. So there's the story in and of itself, and then there are the larger ramifications. You mentioned The Button. That's a 4-part story, a crossover between Batman and the Flash during the Rebirth era, and we'll touch on that because that continues the story of the Thomas Wayne Batman that we meet in Flashpoint.
Right.
And then we also read Flashpoint Beyond. Which now, just in fairness, I'm breaking chronology a little bit. So as we know with this event, I've been going in chronological order. Flashpoint Beyond is very recent. It would really slot in essentially right before Dark Crisis, I suppose. But since it's such a direct sequel, it felt appropriate to do this here. It returns us to the world of Flashpoint, and it also ties into some of Geoff Johns' larger ideas that he explored in Doomsday Clock and that he continues to build out here, especially with respect to the divine continuum that encompasses time in the form of hypertime and space in the form of the omniverse, which includes the multiverse as part of which is the metaverse, which is the prime Earth, as well as the dark multiverse. You know, at a certain point, it just starts to feel masturbatory, all of this business about the omniverse and hypertime and all of that.
Yeah, but like, you got to sell it, right? Like, you got to, like, look, it's very hard, which we found out through the Lazarus reign, whatever the hell that was, that it's very hard to kickstart a new character regardless of what you give him, right? Unless you tie him or her, or them directly into something. When you throw Crisis at the end of something, people are going to be like, oh man, it's Crisis. I got to get involved regardless of how little it has to do with it, right? The most recent thing, like Deceased, was awesome. And the newest one, Night Terrors, was amazing. I love Night Terrors. Night Terrors was great. And that was new. It was just like, hey, we're going to do this, and we're going to stop all the other titles that we want to come out just for this. And I remember I was talking to Sean of Fat Moose, and he's like, oh man, he's like, really, it's got to be in the middle here. But we both said, because we're like you, we're going to give it a shot and we're going to see how it is. It was amazing, dude. And I don't know how a comic book writer and artist like managed to jump scare, like essentially like the audience. But man, there was a lot of that. And I texted Mike, my buddy who works for DC. I was like, dude, you were right. You told me it was going to be good. and it was really good. And he told me they were just finishing up the panel at San Diego or whatever. I liked it, but like I said, you got to go with something that people know. Like at one point, I remember you were talking to Lord Retail, and he was like, "There's whatever 30 books right now, and 25 are bat titles because they know that that's going to bring in the money." So instead of taking a chance on like a Dial H when China Melville did it, which was awesome, they're like, "Yeah, we can't do that because it's not going to sell books. So let's just throw Batman and stuff." Which I have a larger problem with. We'll get when we get to the Thomas Wayne panels, especially.
Yeah, for sure. Thankfully, you mentioned that conversation with Lord Retail. That was a little while ago. And fortunately, I do feel like they have diversified the line a bit
They
more.
have,
It's not all Batman the way it was for so long. So I'm grateful for that. And there's great stuff going on in the super titles. And I've not yet read Night Terrors, but I've heard great things and it's on the list and we'll get there
but
eventually.
since you didn't read it, and we're like, "Yeah, we're getting away from the Batman," not so much. Because guess who the one guy is that fought longest to stay awake? Batman. Who did
Yeah, of
Dead Man
course.
jump into? Batman. It's just like, oh my God. Like it's getting to the point where I remember a couple weeks ago, I read something that people are sick of The Rock because they see him everywhere because all he does is work. My man hustles. He might not print gold all the time, but he hustles. Now people are sick of seeing him. I'm kind of feeling that way about like Bruce Wayne's Batman. Like I really am. It's just too much. I understand the dude has contingencies. I get it. Oh my God. Because if you want to piss off anybody, it's Star Wars people who I love dearly, but the ones that are ravenous are ravenous. Topping that scale now are Bat Boys. Oh my God. You can't say nothing. Of course he's got to be ready. Like I made a joke the other day. I was like, yeah, Batman's got a condo that turns into a mech to fight a kaiju. Of course he does. I'm like, no, man, like he can't do everything. I understand what he's supposed to represent, but he can't do all of that stuff. Like it's ridiculous that every time something happens, he's like, I knew that was going to happen. Like, why? Like, why? Like, why can't I be more shocked for him to be shocked? But instead, especially at the end of like the Batman Who Laughs, it became a headache because, well, you thought you knew, but I'm doing this. I did know that, but you didn't know this. I'm like, oh my God, can we get to the ending? And it's kind of like that where I understand he sells, but at some point, Jesus, man, you got to give it like a rest in terms of, the omnipotence seemingly of Bruce Wayne and his his repertoire of stuff.
I hear you, man. I really hear you. Though I will say, when I was saying that it was starting to feel masturbatory, not so much about the Batman of it all or even the event of it all, but really just all of this business about the divine continuum and this further explanation of the
Yeah.
nature of the DC universe. At a certain point, it just feels like, okay, I mean, I guess I'm interested to an extent as a lifelong DC fan and someone who does a podcast and talks about this stuff, but even I only get so much mileage out of it, and I'm wondering
Yeah.
for the more casual fan, I don't know if it just kind of goes over the head and they don't really think about it much, or if it does put up a little bit of a roadblock. But anyway, that's Flashpoint Beyond. We still have a
Yeah.
way to go before we get there specifically. So here's my kind of overall assessment and relationship with Flashpoint itself in particular.
Right.
I think from an emotional standpoint, with both Flashpoint as well as Flashpoint Beyond, I think the emotional hooks are strong. Barry's grief over
Mhm.
the death of his mother, Thomas Wayne's grief over the loss of Bruce in this alternate timeline, and his quest to set things right so that his son can live. I think
Right.
in both of those stories, the emotional hooks are really strong. Again, when we get to Flashpoint Beyond, all of this whole larger discussion about the divine continuum, again, it doesn't do a
Snow
ton.
globes.
It doesn't do a ton for me, but it's fine. It's fine.
Yeah.
As far as Flashpoint itself, uh, yeah, I guess over the years, it's been hard for me to sort of separate the story itself from its role as an event in terms of setting up the New 52. And I
See,
know,
I
yeah,
didn't, but I understand like why that would be the hang up. But for me, nowadays it seems like I read all this stuff as separate. If it led up to something, I'm like, that's great. But it's more like it was a long, like it spanned every title. And it's like, okay, well, they needed to all right, so they needed to do something. But when I read it, I just read it as like the Flashpoint, thing. I know what it did afterwards, but for me, if I constantly do that, I'll be pissed off all the time.
Well, and that's the thing. I thankfully now have gotten to the point. I would say that this was the first time that I really read it. Yes, I'm reading it in the context of these crisis events and knowing what's to come, but still, this was the first time that I think I was able to read it without being angry at it. Because again, I remember that experience as Flashpoint was coming out, and we knew the new 52 was on the horizon, and word was coming about how these characters, Superman in particular, was going to be changed. And I've done an episode on the new 52 Superman, and I really came around on that, and now I can appreciate his place in the larger mythology. But
Yeah.
at the time, I was really not on board with the changes that were coming. And so the whole time I was reading Flashpoint back in 2011, it was, and again, I don't want to make it sound like I'm irate as I'm reading it, but it was, again, hard to just sort of take the story for what it was and just get on board with Barry's emotional arc when I'm really thinking about the effect that this is going to have on the entire publishing line and my favorite character in particular. But thankfully now this time I was able to just sort of read it and appreciate it for what it is and really delve into the Thomas Wayne of it all. And that's why I asked you to if you'd be on board with including the button in this. And I appreciate you saying yes, because between Flashpoint and the button and Flashpoint Beyond, we spend a good amount of time with Thomas Wayne. Now, of course, as I learned as I was doing my reading, he had this whole other journey in Tom King's Batman run, which I never read, and it was only sort of on my periphery, and I kind of forgot about it. And then I was reminded as I was doing my prep for this, and went to Wikipedia and read up and all of that. But did you read the Tom King stuff?
Honestly, probably. But the only thing that was fresh in my head for this was I boned up on the Knights of Justice, the button, and some of the ones that I had access to, a lot of like the offshoot, comics, even the ones like I was just talking to OG Justin. I was like, I like the Deathstroke in Flashpoint. Like he's a pirate looking for his daughter. Like that was cool because it was something a little bit smaller. So no, I mean, I probably did. If you start talking about it, refresh my memory. Yeah, there's probably a good chance.
Gotcha. If I understand correctly, I only read the very beginning part of Tom King's run. It's sort of on that long-term list of one day, hey, I'd like to finish it and see what the whole deal was. But I guess at a certain point, I think it's Reverse Flash brings Thomas Wayne over to this reality, and Thomas Wayne ends up working with Bane to try to convince Bruce to give up being Batman. And so he kind
Oh
of
my God, no, I didn't. I swear to God. You know what? There was a time that I stopped collecting, obviously, because I got involved in stuff I shouldn't be involved in. That probably, but now that you mention it, Jesus, it seems like I want to read it because I love me some Thomas Wayne.
So there's a whole other chapter in between the button and Flashpoint Beyond, but we still have more than enough to sink our teeth into here, so we'll be good. The last thing by way of setup is that I realize, especially in terms of the true crisis events of what we've covered so far, this is the least Superman-centric, right? Crisis on Infinite Earths, multiple Superman, same thing with Infinite Crisis, very Superman-centric. And even Final Crisis, as we talked about, at its heart, ultimately is a Superman story, and especially when you get into the Superman Beyond of it all. Here, very minimal Superman. We get a very different version of Superman in the form of Subject 1, and they do flesh him out a little bit more in Flashpoint Beyond. I did also read the Flashpoint Superman miniseries. That was not part of our official homework, but I did read that, and I also
but I made sure to do that anyway because I know I'm on a podcast with you, so I made sure to do that one.
Well, you inspired me because I saw your post, and you were going through a lot of the ancillary material too, and I was like, well, I better get on this. So I did read let me mention this too. I did read the Flashpoint Superman and the Flashpoint Night of Vengeance miniseries. So I did have that by way of additional background. But yeah, I mean, these stories, Flashpoint certainly is truly a Flash story, a Flash event, and Flashpoint Beyond is totally a Batman story. So yeah, not a ton of Superman here, but we'll talk about what there is. And that's the last thing I wanted to say though. Just going back to kind of that overall assessment of Flashpoint in terms of its function as this event, I think it occupies kind of a weird space because it was not meant to do what it did. It wasn't meant to be this crisis level event that resets the DC universe. There's this great oral history of the New 52 that's on Polygon.com, and this came out a couple of years ago, and they talked to a lot of the key players who were involved, the ones who were willing to speak. There were a lot who weren't, because there was a lot of bad blood through all of that. But Dan DiDio and Judd Winnick and Scott Snyder and Robert Venditti, like there were a bunch of people who went on the record and talked about how this all came to be. And the kind of the long and short of it is that it was meant to be, again, this Flash centric story where the
Mhm.
timeline is messed up and then is ultimately set right at the end of it. But they had a new president coming on board in the form of Diane Nelson, and there was this push: hey, we got to get new readers. The market's soft. We need to really
Yeah.
shake things up. And at one of their editorial creative meetings, I think the genesis of this was this notion of, hey, when the timeline's reset, this could be an opportunity to tweak this or tweak that. And then I think it just blew up from there. And it became, yeah,
Yeah.
we're going to change a ton of stuff and we're going to restart every book, including action and detective. And it's going to
Yep.
become the new 52. But I think that was retroactive. It wasn't that this event was built for that. So
No, it's
again,
probably built into it because it was like, well, we already have this going on, so we
yeah,
might as well just throw it all together and do. Which is weird because we talked about James Gunn and how like he kind of used, or we're assuming he used this Flash movie, which I will only mention once, as like, look, I need to do the same thing, so we might as well just get it over with, which essentially is what it looked like.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So let me ask you, I guess the personal side of all this, because I know from your posts and just from talking to you and seeing your custom sneaker and custom
Yep.
statues and all this kind of stuff, clearly the Flashpoint story and the world of Flashpoint, the Flashpoint reality, really grabbed you. So what was it about it that has still to this day, right over a decade later, really seems to speak to you?
Um, it was horrifying from start to finish. It was just like the first of all, like let's. So I have a custom Martha Wayne statue because they were never going to make her. But I bought the Prime One Thomas Wayne. He's huge. He's like a third of a scale. He's sitting on a gargoyle. He's awesome, right? For someone that only lived in so many books, I've seen him cosplayed and stuff like that. Um, I always like Elseworld stuff or like alternate world stuff. And when I was like, wait a minute, Bruce died in the alley? And then it was like, wait a minute. So his dad becomes Batman. And when I heard whispers of Martha Wayne as the Joker, I was like, that's taking a shot. And Azarello, just like, look, I will read the newspaper, like the obituaries if he wrote it. Like, it's just one of them dudes that's just like, I like what he does. And as soon as I saw the art, it's like the very simplistic stuff. And I have images burned into my head from Nights of Vengeance, like when Martha is crying and she puts her hand over her face, and that makes like the Joker smile, and then they split, and then he's like, you don't smile anymore, and he comes home and she has already pretty much cut her face into a smile and then staples it back together. She blames him, he blames her, and all they want is their son back. And when she finds out eventually later down the line, yeah, Bruce is alive in another timeline, what does he do? He's Batman. She's like, are you kidding me? Like, it's just like there was no upside. You know what I'm saying? Like the whole thing was depressing, but it was depressing and necessary. If you made them happy, it would make no sense. So Thomas Wayne is trying to die. Like that's what he's doing. He's like, I don't want to do this. He's like, I'm going to kill people with guns because my kid was shot with a gun and he's got the gun that killed his son in a glass case. And it's just like, I'm going to keep doing this until someone kills me. And I'm going to make sure that all of these criminals know actual fear. Not, I'm going to beat you up and send you to Arkham. He's like, no, they're going in a grave. It's a grave or nothing. And like that kind of raw version of parents. And I read this before Hunter came around. When I read it afterwards, it hit just as hard, but in a different way. Because I'm like, yeah, of course I would. I would. If my kid was gunned down in an alley, I'd throw on the cape and fuck, dude, I would do the whole thing. And I was like, no, but people have to die. I'm not doing it to like remove criminals and get them, restored. So I think I saw a lot of myself resonate in both Thomas and Martha. There's an unhinged, like, no, now we're going to kill kids. That's fine. We'll start kidnapping kids and we'll kill them. And then when, Gordon comes in and shoots I was just like, there was no upside. It was going to end poorly. It did end poorly. And it's just like, and it was done. Like there was no fan service of like, and they all have lived happily ever after until Flashpoint Beyond, which was my issue, right? That should have just lived that way. It's just like, it almost ended like you got hit in the face with a hammer. And that was it. They're like, we're done. So I think the raw reality of, yes, he'd be using his doctor abilities to torture people. He's probably hopped up on like tren and steroids and like all kinds of stuff, and he's got a mission, but it's like Bruce's mission, but it's complete. He's just like, no. He's like, I'm not standing for this. People are going to be afraid because they know if I'm out there, I'm not going to break an arm. You know what I'm saying? Like, I'm putting people in the morgue or the hospital. And I think it's because I was like, yeah, that's how people should react. That's how people should react. And Martha's diabolical. I say it all the time. Martha Wayne is my favorite Joker. She's my favorite. She didn't just pop up out of nowhere and it's like no one knows who he is and he's got facial recognition. Then 3 of them showed up, which don't even get me started about that mess. And it's just like she had a real stake in it. She had a real stake in it. He's like, you never smile. She's like, now I smile all the time. It just seemed like Night of Vengeance was realistically what would happen if somebody died in an alley. You know what I'm saying? Not like and I'm going to, swoop in and, I am vengeance and stuff. Like, no, these two were like, no, my kid died. Now someone has to die. Like someone has to pay. And they're their own worst enemies because she's like, I blame you. Dude, it was just awesome. Like, it was thrilling, dude. It's 3 issues that haven't moved me like any other 3 issues, I think, in as long as time as I've been reading comics. So it resonated really hard with me.
Right on. No, I appreciate you sharing all of that. I will say that the Thomas Wayne, the Flashpoint Thomas Wayne and Martha, I think that is more than Barry's story, more than the New 52 that it wrought, more than the divine continuum that we're now contending with. I think that's the legacy of Flashpoint, and I think it's the most compelling aspect of Flashpoint, the Thomas Wayne and the Martha Wayne, because to your point, it's heartbreakingly real and relatable, and we can, and just like yourself as a dad, and I know I say it all the time, but yeah, it's totally changed the way I read so many of these stories.
Yeah.
Typically Superman, but something like this as well.
Of course.
And so that just hits in a totally different way. So that's number 1. Number 2.
Well, it hit harder than the goddamn Canterbury cricket. I'll tell you that much.
Yeah, I did not get that far into
the I did because I told you I was going to as a joke, and I reread it and I was like, okay. But I told you I was going to, so I did anyway.
I appreciate that. Here's the thing, and I want to circle back to Thomas Wayne, but I want to say this in a nice way because I know it's not easy to make comics, right? So I don't say this in a dismissive way. But I remember when Flashpoint was coming out. So you had your core 5-issue miniseries, and then this wasn't your typical event where Green Lantern 86 was a Flashpoint tie-in. Instead, they had these miniseries that explored the world of Flashpoint. And I think I just kind of had an instinct, and certainly I was flipping through them at the comic shop and all of that, but I think I just kind of had an instinct that they felt skippable, right? And I'll just kind of leave it at that. And now I do have to say Night of Vengeance was really strong. So I think that's an exception, but I don't think that's necessarily reflective of the quality of the rest of the miniseries. And like I said, I read the Superman one. I don't know. It really did not do much for me. I'll kind of leave it at that. Yeah. But anyway, with Thomas and Martha Wayne, I think the other aspect of it is it's such a compelling rendition. It's this alternate take. It's this spin. We're flipping the Batman origin story where Bruce dies and his parents live. One becomes Batman and one becomes the Joker. But separate from being this alternate take, it is truly compelling in and of itself. Like if we never had the typical traditional Batman story and this was what we got, it works. Yeah. It totally works. And so I think that elevates it as well.
And then, I don't even know if they had the foresight to be like, people are going to love this so much. But every time I talk Flashpoint, they're like, oh, I like this series. I like that series. But that Night of Vengeance one, like that one speaks to so many people because it didn't pull any punches. So you're right. When I was collecting, because I remember on the top of the Flashpoint books were the coming attractions for the Green Lantern movie with Ryan Reynolds. Like that's how far along we're from this, okay? But I made sure to get every title. I got the Abin Sur one because, yes, a lot of them were skippable, but I was happy that some of them weren't, and I was presently supplies, like the Ravager. That one was awesome, right, with Deathstroke. I was into that because he's just a pirate. I'm like, man, you're a pirate in Aquaman Sea? I don't know if that's a good idea. And I did like the Superman of it all, but he got freed, kicked some ass, and then pimped off. And they're like, and I think it was Thomas. He goes, "That's your Superman." Like the guy just like leaves. So it was kind of like, yeah, he could have did something, but like they put all of their eggs into this one basket, and it didn't turn out like Sasha Kaye, where she's like, "Yeah, of course I'm going to help," and like actually does something. Like he's like, "All right, thanks, man. See you later," and just like leaves. And Thomas Wayne, like he couldn't stop himself. He's like, "There goes your savior." It was just like, oh my god, I don't think anyone saw that coming. Is that what you didn't? Is that what you didn't necessarily like about it? Because you wanted him to like don the suit and the tights and stuff.
So, I mean, I think this is definitely a major area for discussion here about Superman's role. So let's table that for a second, because the
Okay,
last thing I want to say
sorry.
about Batman. No, totally fine. The last thing with Batman, well, not the last thing, more to say, but for the moment, the last
Yeah,
thing about the Thomas Wayne Batman is that, yeah, it's such a great twist on, again, when you have these alternate reality, alternate timeline stories. Yes, there's usually some sort of quest to have to set things right, but there's this added component here where his quest is to die, right? He needs to set this
Mhm.
back to the point where his son lives and he doesn't, and that's more than okay with him, just as it would be more than okay with you or with me, or I'm sure any
Right.
parent out there. But I think that just kind of that adds a different flavor to it, because it's like, yeah, and throughout that story, and even more so in Flashpoint Beyond, there's this constant refrain from Thomas Wayne of like, this won't matter, like everything I'm doing, like this won't matter,
Mhm.
that's the light at the end of the tunnel, and this is just
Yeah.
this inescapable pain and grief, and this is the way out to
Yeah.
set everything right. So it's this quest, right, to fix everything, but at the expense of his own existence. So
Yeah. Which
I
he
just
went from
love that.
being miserable, wanting to die, to being like, oh, so this isn't even real. Like, so none of this, like, all this is manufactured. Cool. I get to die at the end of it. He wasn't like, oh my God, like, save me or like, bring me with you. He wasn't even like, I want to see my son. He's like, just make sure, like we talked about, and like Zach, I got kisses for you, buddy. When he's like, he said this multiple times, whatever you do, do not be Batman. I don't want that. His mom doesn't want it. We want him to live, it says in quotes, in peace. Now, Bruce is always talking about how important his parents are, and my mom and my dad. He goes to visit the grave all the time. You heard your father say, I don't want you to be Batman. He goes, well, justice and everything. Like, why wouldn't that? And I understand, right? Like, Zach's like, you can't do that because then you lose the Bat books or whatever, right? Or maybe you give it back to Dick Grayson or whatever. But like, your whole plight is because of what happened to your parents in the alley after Zorro, Crime Alley, and stuff like that. Your dad wrote you a note and looked you dead in the face in the Button series and stuff like that. And he's like, I don't want you to be Batman. I want you to live your life and live peacefully and find love and have a kid and stuff like that. And he's just like, well, pardon my language. He's like, fuck you. Like, yeah, dad, I did this for you. Or dad's like, good, you don't have to do it anymore. He's like, well, kind of going to do it anyway. And I know you haven't read it yet, but in the Gotham War, the current thing that's going on, Gotham violent crime in Gotham is down 75%. The big wigs like, Riddler, Mad Hatter, they don't have henchmen anymore. All the henchmen have left and now they work for Selina. She's like, they're only robbing rich people. They're only robbing the rich. Stuff that they like insurance will pay off for. She's taken all of these thugs, criminals, violent offenders off the streets. When Bruce comes back from his other multiverse romp with a fake hand, he got mad. All crime is crime. Son, it's down 75%. You got to chill out. And like he kind of like, and I think it's Chip Zdarsky writing it. Like at one point he just jumps off the roof and he's like, no. Like, what are you throwing a tantrum because you're the one who didn't do it? And he's like, all crime. Okay, but if she stops doing what she's doing, now it's going to go back up again. You've been operating in Gotham for how long? Things just continue to get worse. No one's afraid of you. And it's just like, how long are people going to make excuses for that, right? How long are people going to make excuses for, oh, he's going to send them to Arkham and they're going to get better and blah, blah, blah. Like, listen, I know it's a comic and we can write them in our heads if you want to. But at some point, that reasoning is going to start getting stale with a lot of people. Like, look, man, what she's doing is working, and the entire Bat family essentially is behind her. Even Tim Drake is like, she's making a good point, man. Stephanie, all of them, they're like, you're making a really good point. And Bruce is like the only one. Bruce and Damian. I'm sorry, if Damian Wayne is on your side and thinks something is a good idea, you should probably rethink it because he's a psycho, right? And it's just like, now you're getting what you want. And I just think he doesn't like it because he's not the one to make it happen, which, you know, speaks volumes about his ego, and it speaks volumes about the fact that he has continuous traumatic stress disorder, and, you know, he teeters on the edge of having dissociative identity disorder. He's mad. He's big mad because he's not the person who thought this up. And yeah.
No. I listen, I appreciate the passion. One day, years from now, when I do my Batman podcast, we'll have a lot to explore.
Yes.
But, you know, you mentioned the button, and like we said, it's this 4-part crossover. There's more setup involved, but for purposes of what we're talking about
filler
right now,
it's filler. For all intents and purposes, it's filler.
It is. It's a bit of a bridge between that Rebirth special written by Geoff Johns that brought Wally West back to the DC universe and really marked the end of the New 52 and what Johns would do in Doomsday Clock. And this was sort of just kind of planting some seeds for that, but not really moving the story forward all that much. But it's a cool Batman and Flash team up. And
it is, especially the countdown. Countdown, I love. The rest of the book, I was really like, whatever. You knew it was Dr. Manhattan because they had kind of pressed that going to happen. I don't think you needed 3 or whatever 4 books to do that. Like, I don't. It was predominantly them like chasing each other. And yes, Thomas Wayne comes back in, but you didn't need him.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you don't even need to go there. It just seems like, oh, if we put Thomas Wayne in something, we're going to sell issue 2 or whatever it was. I think you didn't even need all that. I do like the countdown, though. He's like, give me 60 seconds. And when Reverse Flash throws up or shows up, he's like, it's cool because each panel counts a different second, and all he's got to do is wait and get his ass kicked, which I thought was cool. But the rest of it, I just thought was unnecessary filler. Like, they needed to put books on shelves for for like a month.
No, I hear you. But, you know, coming out of Flashpoint, Flash is able to, quote unquote, fix the timeline. Not quite, but more on that later. But that seems to be the end of the Flashpoint world. And then in that button story, we get this return to that world and this big question about how the Flashpoint timeline, including Thomas Wayne, even still exists. But it's really ultimately a mechanism so that you can have this face-to-face meeting between Bruce Wayne and Thomas Wayne Batman. And it has a moment, and I posted it on social media earlier today and talked about how it gets me, man. I tear up every time. And
every time, dude. Every time.
I think the first time I read it, because I was really out of the loop for a while, really after Flashpoint, as I've talked about, I really was not into the New 52, and it took a while before I really got back in. And so it's kind of like baby steps at this point. I think I read the button kind of not too long after it came out, but it was still, I think, right before we had our son or something like that. I have to check the dates and do the math and all that. But I just remember when Thomas Wayne says to Bruce, it's like, I delivered you and you were my world. And you know, the second I saw you, I knew that all the choices I made in my life were the right ones because they led to you. And I think about that a lot, not to get too religious or philosophical or what, but I'm not a big believer in the whole everything happens for a reason in that it's some preordained thing or anything like that. In my mind, everything happens for a reason, but the reason is what you find. Like, you find the reason. Everything happens and then you find the reason. It's not that it happened because it was just going to happen.
Right.
But, you know, at the same time, you always hope that you're on the right path. You're doing the right thing, all of this. And that idea is something that has so resonated with me since becoming a dad. This idea of like, like I wouldn't change a single thing. Everything I did, good, bad, or indifferent, like everything I did was right because it got me here. It's a beautiful moment, and it makes me tear up every time. And then, and then Thomas Wayne gives that advice that you were alluding to, where he's like, stop being Batman. You don't have to do this. Your mother and I, like, we would just want you to be happy. And you mentioned Zach Wallner, one of our friends and audience members. And
he made such a great point, dude. He made such a great point. Like, I couldn't wait to respond to that dude. He made an amazing point.
Yeah, because he was talking about how Batman can never stop being Batman. What did he write specifically? He said, Zach Wallner said, so why didn't he listen to Thomas, other than for the character needing to continue to be around to sell comics, toys, movie tickets, etc.? Well, that's the thing, right? So kind of from that real world perspective, Bruce Wayne will continue to be Batman. I also had another audience member on Twitter, or X, as it's now called, Matthew. He commented too, and he was like, but comics like will never let Batman have a happy ending. And I quoted the line from Whatever Happened to the Caped Crusader, where as Bruce is having this end of life moment with his mother, and she says, "You know, the only reward you get for being Batman is you get to be Batman,"
Yeah.
and that's it. And this never ending cycle and everything. But more tangibly, as far as you know, why Bruce doesn't take that advice or what effect it has. I mean, I feel like I don't know. This cuts both ways. On the one hand, to your point, to have gone most of your life without your parents, having lost them in the most traumatic, horrible way possible, to finally have this opportunity to get some parental guidance, right? You would think, okay, that would land, and I might follow it.
Directly from your dad, who
Yes.
watched you die, because he doesn't know what it's like. But they even tell those moments when like Bruce falls through, like that last like conversational panel is Thomas bringing Bruce back up because he fell through. And you had that moment too, which was like beautiful. And like it just seems like that would be the closure that Bruce would need, right? Like came directly from your dad. This is what I want for you. It's Thomas's face in the panel. He's like, this is what I want. He's like, no one wants that. Like, you know, no one wants you to be Batman. Like, we just wanted you to be happy. You don't have to do this. There's other people that can do it. And it's just like, I don't know, that seemed like a great off point to maybe bring in another Batman for a while. And then if it doesn't work, of course, you throw Bruce Wayne back in. But at that point, like, there should have been a definite stopping point after that. Like, in my opinion, there just should have been.
No, I mean, I hear you, but I guess the flip of this, because I was saying, it cuts both ways, and I feel like the other way is if you have devoted yourself to this cause, to this ideal, at least in part to honor these people you lost. Like, it's your whole reason for being is to be Batman. And then you're told by the person whose words you crave.
That's what most,
and whose approval you crave the most. No, but I'm saying, but I could see it going the other way, where it's like, hey, you know, this is who I am. This is what I do. I do it for you. So this idea of like, yeah,
that is unbelievably selfish. Then, if the person or look, I'll give you a real life example, right? Your boy gets older, right? You're working or whatever, right? I don't want to be like your Batman because then I kind of said it right? And say you keep working, you want to retire. Oh no, you don't want to retire. He wants to retire, right? And he looks at you dead in the face and he goes, like, Dad, I got it, man. Like, you don't have to look out for me anymore. Like, I got money, I got a girlfriend, I got all that stuff. What would make me most happy is for you to be home so I could stop by at any time and see you. You're going to tell him no and keep working?
I wouldn't, but but no, but that's the thing. But I mean, I get what you're saying, but I feel like for Batman, it would just, I don't know. I just don't think that would be an easy switch to make. So
I don't know, man. I don't know. That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
You know, the other thing, I didn't bring this up in the last episode when we did Final Crisis because we already went like 2.5 hours, and at a certain point I was like, all right, I gotta let it go. But when I was doing my Final Crisis reading, I read an issue of Superman Batman written by Judd Winnick, fairly deep into the run. This for Superman Batman, not the Batman Superman series that would follow. And it took place in the aftermath of Final Crisis and Bruce's seeming death, and this is where Dick had assumed the mantle of Batman, and it's exploring the Clark-Dick relationship, and Clark's initially a bit put off that Dick has taken over the mantle. There's a lot of back and forth, but they ultimately come to an understanding and common ground, as you would expect them to. And one of the things they bond over is this idea that, it's been a couple of weeks since I read it, but the gist of it was that most people think Bruce did what he did out of vengeance or whatever you want to call it. But what Clark and Dick talk about is how, no, Bruce was grateful that he survived, right? And he wanted to do something positive with that and keep anyone else from experiencing what he did. So I don't know, maybe there's a little bit of that swimming around in there for Bruce too, where it's like, hey, it's Oh, the other thing too is, I think, and this ties into that Tom King run that I've only read a little bit of, but mostly have read about.
Now I want to, because damn, that sounds good.
Where he is pursuing that relationship with Catwoman, and so I think there might be something to be said here. And I would love for the hardcore Batman fans to weigh in here and get some more perspectives on this, because I think there might be
peacefully
something...
too.
Yes,
because I'll slap somebody. Like, be respect. Look, Me and Anthony try to be respectful all the time. You got to do the same thing. And again, just a real quick pause. I'm not hate like listen, man. If Batman's your world and you want to make excuses for all the stuff that he does, like builds a dark side suit, which he goes to get Damien, that one I let go because I was like, yeah, I build a suit to go get my son. And the scene with like Damien on his back all beaten up, that does it to me too. Like, yeah, like of course, man, of course, we people out there. The same people are like Darth Vader is blah. Like I get it, but like, come correct. You know what I'm saying? Like have an adult conversation. All right, good.
I gotta say, very limited accept. We have an awesome audience, and I feel like
Yeah.
anytime people are expressing a different opinion, it's always they're cool, and we have a good back and forth, and I appreciate that. So,
Yeah.
but that's all to say that I think maybe one of the things that Tom King was getting into was this idea that Bruce could be happy without while still being Batman, right? It's not an all or nothing sort of thing, and
Yeah.
so anyway, there's that whole piece of it. But just going back to Thomas Wayne and our perspectives as fathers, I know you'll appreciate this as the Jersey guy that you are. The Jay and Silent Bob reboot movie where they encounter Ben Affleck's Holden character at the comic convention. And for people who've seen the movie, you know exactly where I'm going with this. But
Oh, his speech?
Affleck's character gives this whole speech about how you grow up and you're the star of your own show and you're Bruce Wayne, right? And then you get older and you have kids and you realize, no, you're a supporting player in their
Yep.
story. You're the Thomas Wayne.
I have that
And
recorded. Dude, I screen recorded that on my phone. It's one of the best speeches I've ever heard before. And I bawled like almost the entire time to it because he nailed it, dude. He nailed it perfectly.
he really did. It's my favorite scene of the movie, hands down. And it totally resonates. And it's definitely something I had in mind as I was reading this because, again, look, over the past few years since becoming a dad, I've done a ton of Superman reading.
Yeah.
Not a tremendous amount of Batman reading.
Oh, really? You more? No kidding, really?
But when I do read, and this in particular, this more than anything, right?
Yeah.
We're actually given a story, multiple stories from the perspective of Thomas Wayne. You realize, yeah, it's like I'm not at the point in my life anymore where I read this story from Bruce's perspective. It really has flipped, and so you know all of that just spoke to me so much more. Now look,
And remember,
yeah,
when they're like, Thomas, we need you. We're like Cyborg and his whole clique. We need you. We need you. We need you. The hero to hero. Thomas Wayne looks at them and goes, I'm not the hero of this story. He's like, I'm a guy who's been like murdered and like tortured by my own pain. He's like, I believe the direct quote at one point is like, I have too much blood on my hands to be the good guy. Like that's realistically the truth. And it was just those simple, like hard hitting, like where everyone's like, we need Batman. He's like, dude, like you don't understand. He's like, you don't, and I don't want to do it because I'm not the good guy. I'm not the hero. Like, what don't you guys like? I am a victim, and I'm a product of what happened. Like, I don't want to be the hero. Like, you guys keep saying that. Like, I'm not a hero.
I'm not a
when
hero.
he says,
I'm not whatever Gotham's need me to be.
right. But when Thomas says it, I believe it. Sometimes when Bruce says it, I'm like, dude, you like being on lunchboxes. Stop playing. And now I'm not saying that's all the time, but like, ain't no Thomas Wayne lunchboxes out there. Like, no one got Thomas Wayne. Like, if you live in that world, you don't have a Batman poster or Thomas Wayne in your house. You're shit scared to do anything because Thomas Wayne is out there. You know what I'm saying? Like, that Batman don't play. But I like how he's like, dude, I'm not the hero. He's like, I'm not, dude. Like, I'm not even the good guy. Like, I'm doing what's necessary. Like, dude, he's such a G, dude. I love Thomas Wayne.
Yeah, he's a broken man. There's a line in, I think it's Flashpoint Beyond, but I forget exactly which miniseries it's in, but he says that it's like he's drawing a line between what Bruce is doing in his reality as Batman versus what he's doing in his reality as Batman, and this notion of it's different when it's your child as opposed to Bruce who lost his parents, and it's like to lose a child, it's like you don't get over that, like it's not the same.
Never.
And so yeah,
Never.
for him it's just about this pain and punishment, and the light at the end of the tunnel for him is the end of his existence because it means his son will live. So it's endlessly compelling. Like I said, I don't want to harp on the Flash movie, but we talked about this when we covered it, and I'll just reinstate it now, having reread the source material. It is baffling to me that they gutted, and we'll get more into the Flash stuff in a moment, but they gutted Reverse Flash and the Thomas Wayne Batman piece. To be honest, I'm surprised they even kept Barry's murdered mother at the rate they were going. I think, so, but since we're talking Thomas Wayne, it's like, it's such a gripping part of this story. And I feel like it was such a misstep to just make it another Batman. So I don't have anything more to
because it
say than
was
that we haven't already said, but
because it was Michael Keaton. I got
yeah,
swept up in it too. When they took the cover off and it's, the 89 Batmobile, I was like, "Ooh," like I got all, but like realistically speaking, that movie would have been way better if you brought in the two people from The Walking Dead. Like I know that they were Bruce Wayne's parents in one of the movies. The two
yeah,
people from The Walking Dead, the girl who plays Maggie, which by the way, like give them a movie. Give them a movie. Because if it was them two and you played that and just the Flashpoint stuff, right? Because he still goes to Thomas, he still gets it back without the Wonder Woman and Aquaman of it all. Because let's face it, like that's a multi-part, like that's a trilogy movie right there. But you could have did that, and I think you would have came up with a better movie. I really do.
yeah,
Because then you don't have hokey shit. You can have some hokey shit, but you're not doing it just be like, well, you know what happens? If we throw, you know, Michael Keaton in this movie, it's going to put asses in seats. Well, it didn't.
yeah.
So the chance you should have took, you didn't take.
I know, I know. But let's get back to the Flash of
Yes.
Flashpoint. Now, one of the other things that I sort of had in my head the first time that I was going through this was all this business about Barry's return, and I did even further background rereading for this episode. So, in our last installment, like I said, we did Final Crisis, and that, of course, featured Barry Allen's return to the DC universe. And like I said in that episode, man, did it work for me, because here you have a character who sacrificed himself during the original Crisis,
Mhm.
and he makes his return during quote unquote the final Crisis at a point where the DC universe across the board is at its lowest point, right?
Yeah.
Humanity is being subjected to anti-life. Superman is off in the overvoid having his adventure, and there's the presence of Darkseid that's just warping time and space, and it's
Yeah.
it's it's a low point for the DC universe. And so to have the spark of hope emerge when most needed, I thought it was really powerful, and it was cool.
Yeah.
This idea that he had returned from the Speed Force after all this time. It's funny, in that episode, Mike and I were like, "Where was he all that time?" And I can't remember offhand if one of us actually said Speed Force or not. If we didn't, Speed Force, he was in
Yeah.
the Speed Force, and it was this really triumphant, really heartfelt, poignant return. I think, and then Grant Morrison, right, who wrote Final Crisis, hands the reins over to Geoff Johns for the Flash Rebirth miniseries, and then a 12-issue Flash series with Francis Manapul on art that then leads to Flashpoint. And so I reread Flash Rebirth and that 12-issue Flash
Yeah.
ongoing series. And well, let me ask you first: do you have a horse in this race as far as your preferred Flash and the fact that Barry came back? Is that something that you feel strongly about, or you're like, it's fine? I can take
Honestly,
it
I'm
or
a
leave it.
Wally West guy only because I enjoyed those comics better. Like I can kind of take or leave Barry Allen, like it's really not a big deal to me. But Wally West was always kind of my dude, and for no other reason than he provided like a really good, like a really genuine humor to things. Like it didn't seem forced, and he was more of like a playful. I would say like a playful Flash. Like he knows his power, he knows how to use it, but he wasn't like Plastic Man psycho funny, but he was just like he was the guy that always injected when it needed to. So I've always been, a Wally West guy just because I like that version of the Flash better. But the fact that it was Barry Allen and Flashpoint, I just wanted to read the story. Like I actually had very little care that the Flash was in it at all. Like he kickstarted it, that's fine, but I wanted to read more of the division between Arthur and Diana, because I said this on the show we did before. That's my favorite Wonder Woman. That's my favorite Wonder Woman. We see it all the time. She's just on the edge of being like, no, nope, I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm not going to do this anymore. And finally she did and went ham. So every time that it was like a little side thing about Barry Allen, I'm like, get back to like Orm being like a worm and stuff. Like that's the part that I wanted to read. I know Flash was the vehicle, but I could give a shit less, honestly, if that version of the Flash was in it. He had to kickstart it, but other than that, like I could read the whole thing without his parts at all and be perfectly content.
Interesting. It's funny. When we talk about the world of Flashpoint, this altered timeline after, and again, it's not until really the end of Flashpoint that we learn it was Barry who created the Flashpoint and not
Mhm.
Reverse Flash. But he shatters time forward and backwards, so everything is a mess, and the people closest to him are the ones who are seemingly most affected. And so we get various spins on familiar characters, concepts, dynamics.
Yeah.
So we have Arthur and Diana at war, and really just Western Europe is submerged, and the
Yeah.
Amazons have taken
Great Britain,
London,
they
and
just like to like sink all this. It's like, oh my God.
yeah, so we have that. So there are numerous twists here and there on the classic mythology. Now, obviously, we spent a lot of time talking about the Batman of it all. I think that's really
Right.
really fascinating. The rest of it I thought was cool. I mean, there are little bits like Shazam, for example, right? The entire Shazam family, they each possess one of the powers of
Yep.
the wizard, and they have to unite to form the one Captain Thunder. And I thought that was
Right.
a cool twist on that aspect. Otherwise, for me, I don't get as much mileage out of the rest of the
Right. Like
world
the
of
Ab and
Flashpoint.
Sur and like the rest of the stuff. It was kind of like, yeah, okay.
Yeah, I mean it's fine, and it's interesting, and especially first time through, it's like, wow, like I wonder what's what else is going to be different. But for me, especially now on my whatever this is, third or fourth reading of
Yeah.
Flashpoint, yeah, I was definitely more dialed into Barry, and of course keeping an eye on Superman. The thing with Barry, though, when we go back to his return after Final Crisis, and then what Jeff Johns did with him, this was the big change to Barry Allen's origin story was the murder of his mother at the hands of the Reverse Flash,
Reverse
and this
Flash. Yeah.
idea that Reverse Flash has been messing with Barry his whole life. In Flash Rebirth, which again I reread, he goes on this whole thing where he's like, "Remember that time you fell down the stairs in elementary school?
Yeah.
That was me. Remember that
Yep.
time someone left the door open and your dog ran away?
I
That was
know.
me." Because again, in previously established continuity, his mother was not murdered, right? So this was this new
Yeah.
addition, and it wasn't just a retcon, right? It was the idea that Reverse Flash had essentially retconned Barry's life,
Yeah.
and Barry had to deal with this, and it eventually gets to the point where he wants to change it, and so that's, of course, he goes back in time, and that's what leads to the Flashpoint. I guess this whole concept of Barry's mother being murdered and this being a driving force. This is why he becomes a forensic scientist. He's trying to find out who killed his
Yep.
mother. He's trying to clear his father's name. Again, when he finds out it's the Reverse Flash, it precipitates the Flashpoint.
Yeah.
And again, we've seen it was a huge part of the Flash TV show and the movie and the animated stuff.
Yep.
I've since whatever year it was, 2008, 2009, with Flash Rebirth, I've always been very, very mixed about this becoming such a core idea to Barry's
Yeah.
character. How do you feel about it?
Again, it's one of the things where I'm like, whatever. Like, honestly, I had more mileage out of the Reverse Flash miniseries, a part of the Flashpoint. Whereas, like, there's a Flash museum and there's a this, and like, all he wants to do is be curator. And when they find out, well, it's fucking spoiler alert from however long ago. Like, every time he doesn't like something, he changes it. Like, he strikes out with that girl, tries again in a different way. But the way they retell it is almost like confusing for like the audience. And then you start to pick it up. You're like, wait a minute, someone else. Like, there's a string being pulled here. Other than that, like, I'm like, like, he's Barry Allen's Flash is so low on like my totem pole of like book. And again, I've tried. I got the Francis Monopole run and everything, and I'm just like, I don't. It doesn't seem like there's something dynamic enough outside of like, he's got a treadmill, he can change time, he can break it and fix it. It just seems like they're giving him too much to the point where like he doesn't need all that. So if you're asking me like my opinion about like what it does to him, like, yeah, all right, they kill his mom or whatever, but I don't know. He's never been such a factor. Like, honestly, Flashpoint was the only time that I actually gave a crap about what Flash was doing. And when the other offshoots came out, I'm like, oh yeah, no, I don't give a crap. I want to read these other ones.
Gotcha. I continue to wrestle with it, and I guess I could see it from both sides. It's definitely, here's the thing. Of course, it's a compelling motivation, right? The idea that this happened to his mother, and it's not a Bruce Wayne story, right? Where it was just this
Right.
random attack. It was that he was targeted. So
Yeah.
I
I
do
do
at
like that he
least-
fell down the stairs. I do like that. I thought that was funny where he's like, here I go, when he trips over his own feet. But you know what? I liked that. Like, I like Barry Allen figuring it out. I like him trying to play detective. I like him trying to do that. Like, oh, what happened? I got to figure this. I got to figure that out. And then, gets hit with lightning and they try to reinvent the whole thing. But I liked him struggling because you realize how much he focuses on that power to do everything, right? But when he had to do it on himself, all he did the whole time was try to get that power back. And I understand why, right? Like you need speed. Like, it's like, oh, I don't have a speed force anymore. But I liked the struggle part. I did, because he's always like, well, I'm going to use this. I'm going to use that. Like, you didn't have any of that shit. Plus, do you want to be in a world where your mother doesn't exist? Because that's real. Both of these jerk off egoists. Like, Batman finally gets his parents back. He's like, whatever. And he goes back to being Batman. Barry Allen is in a world where he's like, wait, my mom exists here? Forget the Flash. Why can't I just hang out here? So I don't know. It seems like powers took over, or place and title took over, the driving forces that made them who they were, or that, I'm going to my mom's going to be my why, or my parents are going to be my why. And then you get, in a situation where you have them. It's like, yeah, but I still need to do what? Yeah, but did you though? Like, I understand you needed to sell the book and shit like that, but like, did you really need to? All you wanted was your mom. Now you got her.
Maybe there's a deeper psychological analysis to be had here about whether these motivations are true reasons or excuses, right? So there's
That's
that.
right.
But just as far as this revision to Barry's origin, like I said, I think it is genuinely compelling that this happened to him, to his mother. And I do appreciate the variety that it was not this random attack, but that he was actually targeted by a villain he hadn't made yet. And yes, the whole time travel aspect ties in perfectly to the Flash mythology. Yeah. So there's a lot about it that works. However, that being said, the thing that's, I guess, always bugged me a little bit is, and I know I've said this before on the show, I really don't want to be a broken record, but I just feel like with Geoff Johns, like, I loved what he did with Green Lantern Rebirth. I thought the way he was able to restore Hal Jordan to his former place in the DC universe without totally wiping away everything that had happened and kept Kyle Rayner in place and all of that, I thought it was great. And there was sort of a lot of business to tidy up with that character. One of the things that Johns added there, right, was the death of his father and what a motivator that had been for Hal as a young boy. And I was like, okay, fine.
Yeah.
And then I just felt like, okay, now he takes over Barry Allen, and it's the same thing. And like we always talk about with Superman, one of the things I love about the character and why I like the Kents to be alive, I don't need Pa to clutch his arm and fall to the ground, even though I understand the value that can provide, is that that doesn't always need to be the motivation, right? And so I felt like it took a little something away from Barry to make him like so many others in adding this aspect. There's also the fact, as much as, we chuckle as we talk about Reverse Flash pushing him down the stairs as a kid, but it also becomes the thing where I'm like, he's just... like the Geoff Johns take on the Barry origin and the Reverse Flash's role in it, it just makes Barry such a victim over and over. And I don't... Again, Wally is my Flash, so it's not like I'm so beholden to Barry, but I just feel like the character deserves better.
But like, don't you think that like the Reverse Flash to Flash is like the Joker to Batman? Like, I understand Arch, but that's not what I mean. I mean, like, Joker is in love, almost infatuated with Batman. Got to keep him around. We're the dynamic duo, like we're the anti-dynamic duo and stuff like that. Everything I do for you, so you can continue to chase me around. All that stuff, like all from the playful stuff of pushing you down to like, I'm going to try and make your life miserable because I want to be around you as much as possible. Where like it's this same like pseudo obsession. Dude, he wanted to be the curator of the Flash Museum. It was his hero, right? And it's like, no, now I can do this and I can do better at this and I can do better at this. But at the center of that, there's still this like uncanny obsession with him that is really the same relationship.
There's definitely I don't dispute that. I think there's definitely an obsession. I don't think it's quite as ideological as it is with Joker and Batman, because with Reverse Flash, there is a very tangible component here where he can mess with Barry endlessly. And one of the things that Reverse Flash can do that Flash cannot is Reverse Flash can go back and change history. Typically, that's a no-no and time fights back. But Flash Rebirth establishes this whole idea that when Barry Allen became the Flash, he didn't tap into the Speed Force. He created the Speed Force. Right. And with every stride he takes, the Speed Force grows and powers generations of speedsters. Right. And in Flash Rebirth, Eobard Thawne recreates the experiment that gave Barry his powers and creates the negative Speed Force. And the negative Speed Force has these different qualities and allows Thawne to tap into these other powers. He can adjust his age, for example. And in that Flash series, there's this whole bit he poses as a kid and then he reveals himself. And he also has the ability to go back in time, but he can't kill Barry because he needs Barry to be alive so that he can ultimately become Reverse Flash. And I think, again, so there is that. And that's why it does get interesting in Flashpoint when the Flashpoint essentially renders Thawne a paradox outside of time. And now he's not dependent on Barry's existence. And so that's where he does try to make his move to kill him. But, you know.
Yeah, like he grew past him. Like he had it for that amount of time. And he's like, now I've outgrown you. Like I got this other stuff going on. But so like you led me to this point. But yeah, like now I'm somebody totally different.
But to your point, as far as obsession, it's like, could you be the Reverse Flash without a Flash? The reverse of what, right? Your identity is defined by this other person. So again, psychologically, I think there's
so much so it's flipped colors and his name is Reverse Flash.
Yeah.
Right. Like it's so like he didn't call himself, you know, the Getaway. Like there was nothing like that. He was like, no, I'm just the Reverse Flash. I'm so against him, but I'm so like obsessed with who he is that I'm just going to take the same name, which is a mouthful. Like Reverse Flash is a terrible name, right? But I think that's a part of it. Yeah. It's a terrible name, but it has to be that name. It's got to be that name.
I will say that, you know, it's easy to read this story now. We know the beats. We know what's going to happen. We've seen it adapted. But the reveal that it's Barry who caused the Flashpoint, I think really was a great twist. I mean, I do have to say, like, again, when the story starts, so the end of that Flash series that preceded Flashpoint, Barry's visiting the grave of his mother, and then we see lightning strike, and we see what appears to be the silhouette of Reverse Flash saying everything will change. And then Barry wakes up in Flashpoint in this world, and he doesn't have his powers. He still remembers how everything's supposed to be. He hears that there's a skirmish downtown, and he races trying to change into the Flash. Obviously can't, trips and falls, probably Reverse Flash tripping him.
Yeah.
You know, and he runs into his mother who's alive in this timeline, and he quickly is putting the pieces together, right? She doesn't know who Superman is, but she knows Batman, right? He goes to try to find Iris, and she's with another guy, and so you know, he's piecing together what's going on. But Batman, of course, is always your first stop when you're trying to solve a mystery. And so then, of course, there's all this business with Barry with Thomas Wayne's help. And again, Thomas Wayne almost kills Barry initially.
Yeah.
When he finds him in the Batcave.
He just keeps beating me. He's like, you're crazy. He's like, there's no such thing. You're crazy. What are you doing here? How do you know this place? And just continues to beat him senseless.
But the notion that, hey, I come from this world where your son is alive, right? That's enough to get Thomas to go along with this insane plan.
Instantly. Because at that point, he's like, maybe it's not true, but it's enough to want to know more. Because he's like, I know Bruce, which would make no sense. But, well, I mean, I guess if you lived in that world, you would know that. But like, he started to get very specific about it. And he's like, so what does he do there? And he's like, he's Batman. And it's just like, whoa, like, I'm sure that is not what Thomas Wayne wanted to hear, dude. It's not what he wanted to hear. So it's kind of like, yeah, so I'm damned if I do, I'm damned if I don't, right? Like, my son's Batman, which is terrible, but I can go or he can go. And that's where we talk about like the father sacrifice, right? Like, I'd much rather be the one to just like, I hate my existence as it is. My existence is nothing without my child. So if this means I can get my way either way, I'm doing it. Like, sign me up.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Now, this leads to really, I think, an iconic moment from this miniseries that, just like with Flashpoint adaptation generally, we have seen play out across media now. With I'm referring to Barry's attempt to his initial failed attempt to restore his powers.
Yep.
Right, by strapping himself to an electric chair, dousing himself in chemicals and getting struck by lightning, trying to recreate the experiment that gave him his powers. And issue 2 ends with him just fried to a crisp.
Fried. Yeah, that's what I was going to say, man. That was awesome.
And, you know, it's funny because on Facebook, you get your memories, right? And it shows you what you posted on this date and all the years past. And so Whenever the anniversary of Flashpoint comes around, my old posts will come up in my memories, and there was a little bit of snarkiness there when
Yeah,
that story was first coming out, largely because of, again, my frustration with this impending New
of
52.
course. Right.
Uh, and I definitely had a lot of fun at what I perceived to be Barry's stupidity in terms of bringing about the Flashpoint, frying
Yeah.
himself, thinking that he fixed the Flashpoint, but he actually didn't because it led to the New 52. Now, of course, in Doomsday Clock, we'll learn it was Dr. Manhattan who was actually manipulating events, and we can't lay
Yeah.
all of the blame at the feet of Barry. Nevertheless, I had a lot of fun at Barry's expense in those posts. And as I was doing this reread, I said to myself, okay, you weren't a kid then, but you were a lot. You're like, well, I was like
Right.
24 when I was reading this, and I'm sure I'll approach this a lot more maturely now, and I'm not going to find this funny. And I kid you not, man, turn the
Yeah.
page at the end of issue 2. I'm like laughing, which I don't know. I don't know that that's the I don't know that that's the response you want to engender in the
Yeah.
audience, but I'm just like
Yeah.
this guy. And again, we've seen this on the Flash TV show. I think they did it in Star Labs, but still,
Yeah.
he's trying to electrocute himself. We
Like,
saw this in the
so
movie.
real quick, because again, Flash appears in other stuff. It's great. When he's like, I'm going to put all the same chemicals there. Okay. Lightning's going to strike at this point. Okay. But maybe you can fill in the blanks for me. Was it all the chemicals at once? Was it a splash of this one and a splash of that one? Like, how did he know the exact amount of each? He's like, I'm going to throw them all up there and see what happens. Maybe that's because they had to do it twice. Like, I don't know. But like, doesn't that seem like it's literally lightning in a bottle, right?
Yeah.
Like quite literally, it's lightning in a bottle. How do you know the ones you put up there are going to crash the same way? You know what I'm saying? Like, that always seemed
No, it's a
like
good
almost
point.
hyperbolic.
It's a good point because in Flash Rebirth, it opens with a mystery figure. We later learn it's Eobard breaking into the Central City Police Department, the forensics unit, and killing the techs who were there and grabbing specific chemicals
Mm-hmm.
during the storm. And then he's doused in it and all of that. So, based on that and what we see in these Flashpoint stories, it seems like no, it's a specific and knowable and known by Barry at least and Reverse Flash
Yeah.
uh, set of chemicals that, when electrified, will generate these powers. And I don't like that. I think there really needs to be this element
Yeah. That's
of chance or whatever you want to call it. It's not that, oh, hey,
yeah.
anybody could do this if you have the right chemicals and electricity. It's like, no. It needs to be this right moment,
Right.
right place, all of that.
Which I guess is played out of the fact that he had to do it twice. Right. Like maybe they're like, look, he can't get it right on the first shot. Like he just can't. Because he didn't say which ones. He just said these were all the ones that were here and we'll roll the dice and see what happens. So I guess the nod to that is it didn't work the first time. And the second time it was like, hey, it worked. But even that is a shot in the dark. You know what I'm saying? But listen, I understand you got to keep the book moving. But I'm like you. I'd be more happy if, like, if it was Star Labs put something there and it was unstable and they didn't know what it was and it was one thing and that thing. I just think having all this stuff up there and be like, maybe it's going to work. I don't know. That just seemed like a straight, like even for a comic where, people are flying around and shit. Like even that, I was like, that's kind of a reach.
I do have to say, though, and I'm jumping ahead to Flashpoint Beyond, but when Thomas Wayne wakes up and finds that he's back in this world of Flashpoint that
Yep.
was seemingly wiped away, again, instantly he's like, well, I have to find a time traveler. I have to
Yeah.
set this right. And of course, it starts with Barry Allen, who in this reality is just a normal forensic scientist, doesn't have much of a life or social life, no love in his life. So it's a bit of a downtrodden existence, but he's out there. And,
Yeah.
like Thomas straps him into the chair. And he's got the chemicals
Yeah.
and he's going to electrocute him and all that. And then we have one of Aquaman's agents. We ultimately find out, well, spoiler alert. I'm actually a little, it's funny. I'm a little reluctant because Flashpoint Beyond is so recent. And I know
Yeah.
people might not have read it yet.
It's not, it's not that recent though. It's not that recent. And
Fair enough.
we talk about a lot of stuff. You particularly with your other guests talk about a lot of stuff that like sometimes I'll listen to it, I'll know the story, and you guys make me want to go out and get it anyway.
Fair enough.
So it might not be a spoiler. It might be like, I never wanted to read it, and something that you talk about might be like, what, now I kind of want to read it. Because it never, like, if stuff gets spoiled for you, the ending, but a lot of the fun is in the pieces that gets there. So I mean, I wouldn't look at that as a negative. I think maybe you might kickstart, some love for some people.
I like that. I like that. We'll go with that. So, spoiler alert. Ultimately, that agent is working for Martha Wayne, who is alive after all. But in
Yes.
any event, this agent destroys the chemicals, and so Barry Allen just gets fried and killed.
Yeah.
And again, it's like, man, there cannot be a Flashpoint story in any form, in any media, if Barry
Mhm.
Allen isn't getting fried either to
Yeah.
death or to within inches
Or
of
beat
death.
up and strapped to a chair, or willingly beat up, or beat up because he ends up in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah. Now, of course, in the real Flashpoint, in the original Flashpoint story, after that initial failed attempt, it does work. He gets his powers back. And, one of the first things they do, and we see this echoed in the Flash movie, is, hey, we got to try to find everybody else, right? We got to find
Right.
the rest of our allies. And, we find out that Hal Jordan never got the ring, right? Abin Sur is the Green
I'm
Lantern of
sorry, got it.
Earth,
Yeah.
and Hal Jordan is just this fighter pilot, and on and on. And of course, the backdrop of all of this, like we said, is this brutal war between Aquaman and Wonder Woman. I didn't read their standalone story miniseries,
I
but I
did,
guess
dude. They're so good because it talks about like the wedding, the marrying of the two. Like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's do it for the betterment of humanity. And then, the twist with Orm and stuff, like at the end, like if you don't read those two, a lot of the weight and a lot of the gravitas of it kind of goes away. Because it's just like, damn, it's a double betrayal. Like, that's crazy. And you guys just sat here and watched it happen. So if you didn't read it, like that's fine. But I'm telling you right now, it does. It's kind of like you watch the third part of a trilogy and you're into the characters. But when you read or watch the first two, now you're more invested. You will get more invested if you read their standalones. Yeah.
gotcha. Again, I don't mean to keep going back to the movie, but there too, it's like you have a great on-screen Aquaman and Wonder Woman, and I feel like they could have done something where you don't even need them in the whole movie. You just have them in a
No.
couple of scenes, and you have the battles in the background, and I think that would have
Just
gone a
have
long way.
Mera's head getting chopped off by Gal Gadot. Like, just give me something. Give me a nod. You know what I'm saying? Like, don't just call it that because it's not that. You're just trying to capitalize on the name with very, very small nods. You know what I'm saying? Like, dude, that part, which by the way, that part was awesome because did they talk about how they're sisters and warriors or whatever? And Diana just chops her, yo, Miss, and then wears her helmet. Like, I'm like, you're a pimp. Like, she's like, no, and I'm gonna wear it. And I'm gonna wear it when I fight him. And it was like, oh, that's why she's got that helmet. Like, it's good, dude. I love Diana when she's like that. I love it. As a matter of fact, I put up that one picture that the artist made of Diana, the way she should look, and she's like taller and wider than Batman. And she's kind of like kissing him on the top of the head. That's she's an Amazon. She's big. She's strong. That's what she should look like.
Just like the New Frontier version.
Yeah. Oh, asking you because I like obviously the Knights of Vengeance resonated with both of us. Me more so in the fact that there's I made custom stuff to match it up. Did you enjoy it? Because you read Knights of
Yeah.
Vengeance. When you read Flashpoint Beyond, specifically, the Thomas and Martha of it all. Did you like it, or were you like, this was really unnecessary? Like, this didn't need the happy ending. Like, you go first, and then
Oh,
I'll.
oh. Well, I want to. Well, let's circle back to that because
Okay.
I really want to get into that and the ending for now, as it
Yeah.
were. But as far as Night of Vengeance in particular, no, I really liked it. I'm glad I read it. It definitely enhanced my appreciation for Flashpoint Beyond because you
Right.
get all of the backstory with Thomas and Martha, and you
Mhm.
laid out a lot of that earlier with her, disfiguring herself and,
So
and
good.
and all of that. So, no, I'm so glad that I read it. But again, so Bruce and Barry are looking for their friends. And so this brings us to the Superman of it all. So in this Flashpoint world, Superman's rocket crash landed in Metropolis and
Mhm.
caused tens of thousands of deaths.
Mhm.
And rather than being raised by the Kents or any other kindly couple, Subject One, as he's designated, becomes property of the government. It's
Yeah.
the
Immediately put into capture.
it's the version of the story that the Kents always warn about and try to guard against, right? You have to
Mhm.
keep your abilities. Going back to Smallville, you got to keep your abilities secret,
Yeah.
right? Because
That's why I
they'll come
liked
and
it.
they'll
It was like
take you
perfect.
away,
Yeah.
right? So this kind of shows you, okay, if he's not found by the Kents, what happens? And so he's raised in this government facility under red sun lamps. So
Sunlands. Yeah.
his powers don't develop, his body doesn't develop, and just his character, his
Yeah.
social abilities, everything is stunted there. And Batman and Flash enlist the help of Cyborg, and the trade is we'll help with this war against Bruce and not Bruce, Arthur and Diana in exchange for
But we
Cyborg's
need this
help.
guy.
Yeah, we need this guy. Like, this is the guy, just like we saw in the Flash movie, right? It's like Clark will know what to do. Clark's the only one. He's the most powerful being on the planet, and so he's just this frail, skittish alien subject who the first chance he gets in Flashpoint books it. He's just out of it.
I love that part. It's amazing.
Now, look, ultimately, in the end, he will come back.
Yes. Yes, he does.
At the climax, and he will intervene. And I forget exactly what he attacks one of them, right? Or Aquaman or Diana.
Yeah. I know it's one of them, but I got so caught up in the side stuff. I know how it ended with the sword and the stabbing and stuff like that, and I know ultimately what like the final panels look like. But I forgot who he attacked. I think he was attacking people on both sides, but I think it's because someone attacked him first. It's probably the Amazons, to be honest with you, because he's a floating guy with superpower.
And and I know you read and reread that this Flashpoint Superman miniseries gives us more of the backstory. And there was this soldier who underwent this procedure to become this superhuman asset for the government, and then went crazy. And there's a lot of back and forth. And Kal-El had this meeting with Lois Lane, but she ultimately died in front of him. The other piece of this, I guess the one bit of value that I got from the Superman miniseries was that Sam Lane, of all people, he's been depicted different ways, across time and media, but here this was actually kind of a kinder, gentler Sam Lane. And he was really the only one who showed Kal-El some kindness and actually saw him as a son, not just a subject. So I don't, I'm curious to get your take on this. No, go ahead.
Did you, actually, because what you just said led me, did you read the Booster Gold mini?
Mm-mm.
So you don't know about the doomsday of it all? So
that was one of the other alien subjects
where they have doomsday, because Booster Gold shows up in, I don't know, Coast City or something, and they think he's an Atlantean because he's dressed weird, right? But it turns out that they have doomsday, but he's got this like mind probe thing. Who's got it on? Lane? I don't know. Like someone from the comics has it on, and they unleash doomsday on Booster Gold. Now Booster Gold has knowledge that this is not his world, right? And he's like, where is everybody? I got to find this person. I got to find that person. They unleash doomsday, and he goes into this like whole. He's like, I can't do this alone. He's like, this guy almost killed me the first time, but it's a subdued doomsday because he can only do what the person controlling him with his mind do. Then they eventually lose control and he starts to become doomsday again. Then they get it back. I thought that was really cool. Like I thought Booster Gold not knowing what the hell was going on for like 3 issues. Like I like that. But at that point, it's just like, he's not an Atlantean. Ask him. Like they opened up like a channel to him. Just be like, hey man, are you with them? And I know they probably thought he was lying or whatever, but I really like that because it was a different doomsday, but still carried the same weight that doomsday had. Especially for the reader, I thought that was really cool.
That's cool. I will have to check that out. I mean, I knew that doomsday played a role because doomsday's DNA was the basis for the super soldier's powers, and that's how he was able to continually adapt. So that was neat. But I guess looking at Superman's arc from Flashpoint, again, he escapes and runs away, but then he ultimately intervenes in the end. Not, a man of very few words here. But then we cut ahead to Flashpoint Beyond, right? Where this Flashpoint world is still in existence. The war is still raging. And we find Superman is still operating. He intervenes when Thomas Wayne is about to kill a mugger that he's beating the crap out of. And Superman shows up, and he's wearing a cape now, but still doesn't look like the Superman we know.
Yeah, still pretty like emaciated and stuff like that. Like he doesn't look like he looks like dead man wearing a cape.
Yeah, I mean,
very not much yet.
It's interesting because I would be curious, not to get nerdy about this, what sort of power level he's operating at, because he seems to be physically capable, but he doesn't have the physicality that we typically associate with Superman.
Okay, but I see it as sometimes the best thing a boxer can do is break his hand, because then he can punch the whole time and he doesn't feel it, and it hits harder because he can't gauge how hard it is. I think the S1 version of Superman is stronger only because he doesn't have the same restriction mentally. Like he doesn't need to be big. His power didn't come from that anyway.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So the fact that like he's like, you can't reason with him, really doesn't say much. So the fact that he's swinging essentially a broken hand at everybody without the, you know, Ma and Pa taught me this and they taught me restraint and blah, blah, blah. He doesn't have any of that. So I think he's way more dangerous. He's way more dangerous. Not like a, you know, the Homelander style, but he's way more dangerous in the fact that he's like, no one's tried to regulate him.
Yeah. No, for sure. I mean, I guess it's just interesting. Like, I get him being frail at the outset. He's been under these sun lamps, but now by the time of Flashpoint Beyond, presumably he's out. He's soaking up the yellow rays, and it's not like Superman in the mainline universe is working out, right? He's just physically developed. And
I mean, I guess just from doing what he's doing, if you want to talk physiologically, he's going to have some sort of muscle mass. Like if he's picking up buildings, it's like doing one big set. So yeah, I imagine, but like, we don't know if this other dude is necessarily doing all that stuff.
So, right. And so we don't get a ton of backstory, but we get a fair amount, certainly more in Flashpoint Beyond, where we find out again, he's operating, he intervenes, he stops Thomas Wayne, he's wearing the cape. He's also aligned himself with Poison Ivy and Swamp Thing, and they've developed this rare oasis on Earth while this war is decimating most of the planet, but this green oasis. And this is sort of their command center as they are bracing for a Kryptonian invasion. So in this reality, Krypton wasn't destroyed. It was on the verge of destruction. Right. And Kal-El and all of these other children in ships were sent out to Earth as kind of the advance party. And now Jor-El and the others are coming. And it's sort of like, even to Kal-El, it's like, you get in line or we're taking you out too.
Right. And it's very Dark Knight Master Race. Yeah. Where the Kryptonians, where they all show up and they're like, no, we're going to take over. This is what we do. So it's kind of like in the same vein of that, which is always petrifying. One Superman is bad enough and he's a good guy, right? Imagine if the whole world that worshiped like Ra's, this god, or like that's just, or Rao or whatever, like that's just, it's a petrifying thought, especially because when most stories about Superman are written in an Elseworlds fashion, he's evil, right? He's evil, or he's raised in Russia, or whatever it is. He still kind of retains that, you know, truth, justice thing. But the people from Krypton might not. And now you got to deal with a whole bunch of Zods, basically. Some Zods, some not Zods, but like they'll destroy the planet just from fighting.
Yeah, and you know, we don't get to see the battle play out. The story ends before that point. But again, this Subject One, Superman, has committed himself to stopping the invasion of his people by his people. And I guess I'm trying to decide whether or not that totally tracks for me in this version of the character. And I, you know, one of the other times you were on the show, we did Red Sun and a couple of other Elseworld stories. And I enjoyed that episode a lot when we talked about all that stuff, because I think one of the things it clarified for me was the value or the appeal of these kinds of stories when he's raised by someone other than the Kents. Because my gut reaction is like, well, of course he's going to be different. He is Superman because of who he is. Right. But one of the things that I think I realized over the course of our chat was like, hey, the whole nature versus nature versus nurture. So it's like when you strip away the Kents, the value of these kinds of quote unquote Elseworld stories is that it can reveal, okay, what is his true nature? If you've taken the nurture away, what's left? What is?
And it's always a protector, dude. He was raised on Apocalypse. And he falls in love with humans in like attoseconds, and he's like, we're going to protect you. That's why, like, I love that it always goes back to that. Because that to me is more than I got this, like, and we talked about this. My personality is amplified by Ma and Pa, but I've always been this genuine fighter for everybody forever. Like, yeah, I mean, I got a lot of knowledge from them, but deep down inside, he's always going to be the good guy.
Yeah, which I guess, I mean, ultimately, I don't dispute that. I think, yes, there is that good core there. Yeah. And I guess, too, even though it wasn't the Kents, there was nurture in the form of Sam Lane. There was someone who showed him kindness. So it's not, I'm not saying like, oh, it makes no sense that he would go down this road. But I don't know. I still don't know, based on what we're shown, that I would totally buy this, especially given the way he was raised. I mean, Sam Lane aside, he was this lab rat. And so the notion that his people now are coming for him, I don't know. I feel like there's more to explore. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like, I don't know that we got all the way there, but...
I think what we just talked about, I think that wasn't forced in those other stories that we did. I feel like it was forced in this one because you were basically manhandled and left prisoner and left weak by these people, right? You didn't just run into them, you knew it was them. When you find out all your people are coming, you're like, that now we're talking. It seems like this one was a little forced, where it's like, okay, I could get it because it's Superman, but still, that was a I don't know. I think that one was a reach.
Kind of running back to Flashpoint itself, uh, it- eventually, like we said, we have Reverse Flash reveals himself, and again, Barry and the audience think, okay, now he's going to talk about how he set all of this in motion. And the end of issue 4 is Eobard saying, "Look what you've done, Barry."
Mhm.
And it's a great cliffhanger. And then we get this explanation of like, hey, like for all the stuff I've done to you, this wasn't me. This
It's
was
still not me.
you.
Yep.
You went
Yep.
back in time. You stopped me from murdering your mother. And you were like a bullet through a windshield in
Yeah.
terms of your effect on the timeline. I will say this, because this came up in the Flash movie. Um, the Flashpoint itself, I don't think does a good job of explaining how Barry's actions affected events even before his mother's death. Flashpoint Beyond gets a little bit more specific,
Yeah.
if I'm remembering correctly, where they do talk about essentially it's a version of what Michael Keaton gives us with the bowl of spaghetti and
Mhm.
the fulcrum point and all of that. But uh, yeah, I mean again, I think it loses its effect a little bit now because we know it, and even so much so that the adaptations that have followed don't make it a twist, right? Like in the
Yeah.
Flash TV show at the end of season 2, he's like, "I gotta go save my mom," right? Like he
Yeah.
saved the day, he's kissed Iris, like everything's great, and he's like, "I can't let this stand. I have to go back and save her."
Yeah.
Flash movie, same thing. He has that whole conversation with Bruce, and then he goes and he does it. But I think it's a great reveal, and I feel like it's you don't often get to see the hero of the story make that big of a mistake,
Yeah.
right? But you understand where he's coming from, and it's funny too because he wanted a better world, right? A world where his mother is alive,
Yeah.
and look what he wrought. And
At
when
the
we go
risk of, yeah, right.
and when we go back to these other crisis level events, look, when we go back to the original Crisis, and Anti-Monitor just wants to take over or annihilate everything. But when you get to Crisis in Time with Hal Jordan Parallax, right? He wants to fix everything. He wants to make
Yep.
everything better and rewrite history. When you get to Infinite Crisis and Alexander Luthor and Superboy Prime and Earth 2 Superman, right? They want to bring back a better Earth that's more positive and more optimistic and more hopeful. Final Crisis, Darkseid just wants evil, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but this whole
Shocking.
idea, especially in Infinite Crisis and Zero Hour, you can see some parallels with Barry Allen and this idea. Again, he doesn't realize what he's doing, but still, this whole idea of like I have to fix everything, I have to make it better.
Mhm.
I like that.
But like in his, you gotta understand, you're swinging a zero, right? Every time you try and make something better, it has been proven that you continuously mess it up. So don't do it anymore, right? Like stop. Like it's like it's kind of like your friend that's like, oh, I can fix that, and every time he wants to fix something, he breaks it, and you go, no, you know what? I got it. Or like if someone comes over to help you move and he ain't strong and he wants to carry down something really expensive, you're like, you know what? Why don't you take this box full of fluff and blankets and let me get the other thing? I feel like that. I don't know, man. At some point, like, don't you just go, all right, you know what? I'm not going to do this because this is a really bad idea.
Yeah, but you're talking about Barry specifically. I mean, he
Yeah.
hasn't done it before, as
Yeah,
far as we
but
know.
it just seems like you don't need a lot of it to know that when you do it, there's always a risk, right? So it's not actions that have been done, but he's always like, if I just like, dude, it didn't work out monumentally the time that you did it. So can we stop doing it? So I don't know. It just seems like the one trick pony thing that keeps getting him in trouble.
I mean, it definitely feels like he should have known better,
Yeah.
especially because, again, it had been established only Thawne has the ability to change time. Now,
Yeah.
what I will say in Barry's defense, as if he's a real person and I'm his attorney, what I feel like one of the things that sets this apart is it's not just that Barry's mother was murdered and he wants to go back in time and stop it. she was murdered through the time travel machinations of Reverse Flash. So
Yeah.
time was altered. It just happened to be altered by someone who's quote unquote allowed to alter it without time
Allowed to
fighting
do it.
back.
Yeah.
So I feel like, again, that adds a component to it as well. One other piece of background that I totally forgotten, and it's not major, and I don't know that it even really gets mentioned at any point really, but in The Dastardly Death of the Rogues, that's the first arc of the ongoing series that followed Flash Rebirth by Geoff Johns and Francis Manapul. Again, long story short, I'll keep it brief, but there's this this piece of glass that was created by the original Mirror Master. And it's like,
Yeah.
in case of if Flash ever returns, break
Yeah.
glass.
Yeah.
And the Rogues aren't sure exactly what it's going to do, but when it is broken and there's, Barry's told misleading things about what it'll actually do. But what the current Mirror Master reveals at the end of the story is that the energy within the glass or whatever, it sort of plants a seed within the Flash in this case, and preys on his doubts and his fears, and it just kind of plants that seed and it'll grow. So it's sort of like this long form emotional psychological torture.
Yeah.
And there's never much more that's really explicitly said, but that's the end of the first arc, and then we only get one more short arc before Flashpoint. But in that short arc, you do see Barry dwelling a bit more on his mother's passing, and then it comes upon her birthday, and that's when he goes to the grave. And so,
Right.
there's that too, I guess, to maybe mitigate Barry's culpability slightly.
Yeah.
This idea that he was not to the level of Hal Jordan with Parallax, but that there was this at least subliminal piece that was pushing him and maybe was making this come up more. So
Yeah. So real quick, just to talk about the Martha and Thomas of Flashpoint Beyond, right?
mm-hmm.
I wanted to like it because it's Thomas and Martha. Then she comes back, and there's very PG versions of them fighting when you put it up against the original Knights of Vengeance, right? Then, spoiler alert, they lock her in like a Hannibal Lecter style thing, and it's happily ever after with Harvey Dent's kid, right? Where it's just like, I didn't need that. You know what I'm saying? Like, it took the brutality and the misery from the first one and tries to give it a redemption arc when it didn't need one. Was I happy to see Martha in print again by a different artist and stuff? Oh my God, yeah, I was super excited. It was like the reunion that I never knew that I wanted, but I wanted to see more of her. Like, if there was a whole miniseries just about her time in that time in Gotham, I'd read it. Dude, I'd subscribe to that. But I didn't need the American Gothic kind of like Rockwellian thing with like him and the kid walking away and she's like, my boys. Like, I didn't need that, man. It just seemed like it took all the sauce and like all the energy right out of that original run. Right? Like, doesn't it seem like it was like, we're gonna do this and everyone's gonna live happily ever after? That's not the way the story, from the way I read it, that's not how it was supposed to go. Like, it was supposed to be misery. She doesn't need to be alive again. Most certainly, she's like the dude in the chair now. Like she gets the Hannibal Lecter treatment, and that's how it ends. She's like, "Bye, guys." Like, what? Why? Like, why was that even necessary? I don't know. That's just my complaint.
Yeah, no, it did feel like a stretch. So at the end of Flashpoint, Barry makes this sacrifice. He's going to reset the timeline, even though it means he's going to lose his mother, and it's very emotionally resonant.
Yeah.
As he is. He stops himself from stopping Thawne. And then as he's returning to the present, we get our first appearance of Pandora. Remember that character?
Yep.
Who talks about
and the Trinity,
yeah, the history of heroes had been splintered into three, and they must come together. So you see the Wildstorm, Vertigo, and DC universes merging, and that gives rise to the New 52. And of course, as we will learn first in the DC Rebirth special, and then more fully in Doomsday Clock, which we have a whole episode coming up on, Dr. Manhattan had his hands in things, and he was manipulating the timeline and changing events in the DC universe. So again, coming out of Flashpoint at the time, it was just kind of like, oh, hey, Barry just screwed everything up. He didn't fix the timeline the way he thought. Now we know there was another agent at play here. But that seemingly is the end of the Flashpoint world until we get to the Button. And again, presumably through Dr. Manhattan, kept it kept it alive
Yeah.
briefly, and we had this interaction, and then it's gone again. Of course, like we said, Thomas Wayne will cross over and he'll be in the Tom
Yeah.
King
Yeah.
Batman room. But then we get to Flashpoint Beyond. So there was a 0 issue and then a 6-issue miniseries, and it was written by the trio of Geoff Johns, Tim Sheridan, and Jeremy Adams, and drawn by, and I might be butchering the names, but Zermanico,
Yeah. Yeah.
and Mikhail Janin. I don't know if I'm
Oh, I don't know.
probably
There's
probably
two that
butchering
I'm
it.
just like, yeah, yeah. But like, ironically enough, just real quick, one of my favorite DC cover artists. They have some of the most dude. They got a murderer's row of comic artists for covers. There's one that I'm going to butcher her name too. She's gorgeous too. I didn't know this. Zojo Micah. It's like a one name. Her covers. It's like something out of like a graffiti slash cyber. It's so good. It's so good. But again, names. I'm just like, unless I hear someone say it, I'm going to screw it up. So I'm going to do my best version of whatever I think that is. So yeah, believe me, I understand.
Totally. So in our reality, we have Batman stealing the snow globe and
The
wasp
snow
that
globe.
are
Yep.
imbued with Dr. Manhattan's energy from the lab of the Time Masters. And it takes the course of the miniseries. Most of the pages of Flashpoint Beyond are devoted to the world of Flashpoint and Thomas Wayne's story. But
Yeah.
in each issue, we get a couple of pages, or sometimes more by the end, of Bruce Wayne and our reality being chased down by Rip Hunter and taken to
Yeah.
task for what he took. Because what he took, the snow globe and the watch, allowed him to like catch and capture and preserve the Flashpoint timeline within this snow globe. And everything's breaking apart because Thomas Wayne within this reality, this preserved timeline, is fighting back, right? He's trying to stop it. He's trying
Yeah.
to basically redo what he had done with Barry in the first Flashpoint. And by the end of it, Thomas Wayne comes to accept his reality, and that stabilizes the globe, and the Time Masters allow Bruce to keep it. There's also some setup at the end for the Geoff Johns New Golden Age and Justice Society series. There were the 13 characters who had been removed from the timeline and placed in these capsules, but then they're sent back into the timeline, and history is reforming around them. So there's more on that that Geoff Johns is still playing
I'm digging
with.
that run too. The Justice Society run is actually really good with like led by
Nice.
the Huntress and stuff like that. It's good. It's good. It's a
Cool.
good read.
So I
And
guess, yeah,
by the way, the Wildstorm of it all, you know who the new Birds of Prey group is, right?
mostly.
Dude, get this lineup. Harley, of course, right? Big Barda, Zealot. Dude, I was just like, just those three alone. I'm like, I'm reading this story. And the dude who's doing the art for it, I opened it because Sean showed it to me. The dude has hues from Darwin Cook, like that very, original, like not a lot of shading, like very like flat. Dude, it's really good. But that's a team like I'm stoked to see, man. Like that team is crazy. Like just those personalities together are going to be awesome. I'm sorry, that was a whole sidebar.
No, I am looking forward to reading that. So I guess overall, I really enjoyed Flashpoint Beyond. I thought it was very compelling. It held my interest. It was an intriguing mystery in the world of Flashpoint. How is Flashpoint even still around? And Thomas Wayne is tracking this clockwork killer who has been murdering potential time travelers and removing their organs and replacing them with clock parts.
With clock parts, yeah.
Right, so there's that, and of course, war is still brewing between Aquaman and Wonder Woman. We have this impending Kryptonian invasion. Thomas Wayne, in his mind, nothing matters because it's all going to be undone anyway. When he can find or create a time traveler and go back in time and fix everything.
Just keep beating them and electrocuting them. That's all. Just start picking random people off the street.
Yeah, and you have Judge Harvey Dent is killed early on, and his wife, Gilda, is in Arkham. She's lost it because their child, who had been kidnapped by Martha Wayne in the Knights of Vengeance miniseries, allegedly took her own life, but we later find out Gilda was responsible for that.
Yeah.
So she's in Arkham, and Judge Dent is killed, and so Dexter Dent, their son, ends up orphaned, essentially, and taken in at Wayne Manor and cared for, in this reality, not by Alfred, but by Oswald Cobblepot.
Yeah. Which I actually like that. Like, when it was Oswald Cobblepot who plays like Thomas's first thing, because he's got this giant casino. I like that. But also I like the fear from it too. And he's such a good dude too. Like he's pretty much looking after the kid the whole time. Yeah. And he's like, dude, you can't do this to this child. He's like, you can't, like, dude, he's got to live. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, you can't subject him to this. And that's kind of what happens at the end. Like, they walk away presuming that it's going to be Batman and Robin, right? Or some sort of version. And Martha is, you know, in a cage. And I just thought that was a weird way to, you know, put it, especially because they didn't do anything with it afterwards. Like, show me that. Like, I want to read that, but I want to read Martha Wayne as a bad guy, or at least a nut job. Because when she set up Harvey Dent's daughter, if I'm remembering this correctly, to get shot by Commissioner Gordon when he walked in, I was like, holy shit. Like, I was like, no way. Like, no way. And she was like, that's what you get. You shouldn't have shot first. And it was just like, man, like, she's brutal, dude. She's brutal.
Yeah, you know, what we ultimately find out, again, spoiler alert, is that Martha survived her apparent death in that Night of Vengeance miniseries.
Which,
And
again, didn't like that book.
and I agree. And is this clockwork killer? She's been killing potential time travelers. She's learned all of this from Psychopirate, a fellow, where she's hiding in the walls of Arkham, and he's an inmate at Arkham.
I did like that she was like the whisper in Dent's wife's ear, right? Like, that was her, like, the whole time. I thought that was really cool.
Right, because you think so. Gilda is insane, and she at a certain point bashes her face against the door and essentially turns herself into Two-Face.
Yeah.
But she's hearing this voice that you assume is just her split personality, but it's actually Martha in the wall. So that was a neat bit of business. And then Psychopirate, in a nod to Dark Crisis, there's this talk about how he fled to this reality to, you know, kind of escape the Dark Crisis, right? And ended up in Arkham here. And he fills Martha Wayne in on everything, right? And that's why she's going about taking out these time travelers. I guess, I mean, her motivations, it's interesting. So she takes out the would-be time travelers, Matthew Ryder, for example, of the Linear Men. And she creates the time sphere that the Time Masters use to travel through time. And her plan is to go back and save Bruce. So, I mean, interestingly, Thomas and Martha's goals, at least until the very end, are aligned.
Are the same. They just have different avenues to get there, and that's where the complications come in. Right?
Like, so, I mean, he's trying to find or create a time traveler to do this, where she's killing all of the time travelers and building a time sphere. I feel like they have just gotten on the same page here.
I know, but it's the perfect dichotomy, right? Like, she ruins stuff, he tries to create stuff. But I like that. Like, they're completely opposites, but they still have this love. Like, even in Knights of Vengeance, like, they have this kind of like killing joke pseudo embrace where, like, he's hugging her and, like, but there's like a violent struggle going on. Like, that's what made it so touching. Because at one point, I think she starts crying. And she's like, it is your fault. Like, none of this would have happened if we didn't go down the one fucking place that you probably should go down in the first place. And it was just like, and then they just splintered, man. Like, from there on, like, I love that, like, then she doesn't leave the house. And she doesn't want to be bothered. And he gets more upset and stuff like that. Like, oh my God, it was so good, dude. It was heart-wrenching, but it was like true to life. And that was one of the points I was like, people always like to bring up The Boys, right? This is what happens if superheroes were real. I think it's more the Flashpoint world. I do. A lot of that stuff seems way more realistic. You got someone who runs 75% of the world, sick of people doing whatever they want with the ocean. You got Wonder Woman who's like, men are ruining everything. You have all these players in between. You have Thomas Wayne, who's like, I'm shooting people until I feel like I'm good or I'm dead. His wife is a psychopath who's literally doing everything to kind of get in his way because she's mad at him. I don't think the boys are like, I think this is closer. I really do, especially because of how they're like, no one's going to stop me in this. I don't care who gets in the way. So I kind of like this more as enjoyable and not just, and look, I love the Boys series. I read it when it was coming out, but it's that without like, we're going to put sex on every panel too. And like the teenage kicks jerking each other off. Like, I think it's more this.
Yeah. No, again, I think the way that their Waynes respond, though extreme, it tracks in terms of the extreme trauma that they've gone through. So no, I agree with you. So again, as far as Flashpoint Beyond, what this culminates in is, Martha's ready to use the time sphere to go back in time, but Dexter, who's being held at gunpoint by
Yeah.
or knife point by Gilda,
Mhm.
who's planning to kill him, is there and is basically saying, well, if you do this when I die, and Bruce is like, well, it'll just be like it didn't really exist at all.
Yeah.
But he can't go through with it, and I think it's seeing. I'm assuming seeing some version of his son in this young
Yeah.
boy. He ultimately can't go through with it, and they save him. And then in our wrap up here, like you were saying, we have Dexter now as the new Robin. Thomas Wayne has decided to continue on, and Martha, though seemingly killed at Arkham, survived and is in this glass prison in the
Yeah.
Batcave, essentially offering moral support, looking at
Yeah.
young Dexter and pointing out that his shoelace is untied. So it's like that
Yep.
maternal instinct is kicking back in, and they're this very unorthodox crime fighting trio
Mhm.
family of some sort. I guess, like I said, overall I enjoyed this. I think two issues, one from either end. So from Bruce's perspective, we find out the reason he was so convinced that the timeline would stabilize and Thomas Wayne would want to live, right,
Right.
is that we finally get the rest of the letter that Thomas Wayne
Yes.
had written to Bruce in the original Flashpoint and gave to Barry to give to Bruce. And again, we had heard the first part before, but the second part was essentially like, I will try to be happy, right? I
Yeah.
will try to move on. And that's enough, that inspires enough confidence in Bruce that he goes through with this. I guess I think maybe I'm being nitpicky because maybe I like what I just articulated. That's what the book tells us. And maybe that's enough to account for why Bruce is so adamant that no, I'm going to preserve
I
this
have to
timeline.
keep on. Yeah. Yeah.
Because, but I don't know, at the same time, from Bruce's perspective, like as a son and as a father himself, who has also lost Damien, he got him back, thankfully, but he's
Yeah.
gone through that. It's like, I mean, I want to say, like, don't you know your father wouldn't want to live in that reality? But I guess my answer is he's been told by Thomas, I will try to be happy. But
Yeah.
going back to the earlier part of our conversation, he doesn't always listen to what Thomas says.
Yeah.
So
And it's just like, do you want the world where your parents are alive? One of them who who becomes seemingly more hinged. Well, they both become seemingly more hinged. You want your dad running around as Batman, and your mom, the memory that you have of your mother is like the caretaker and she sang you to sleep and like that. You want her locked in a cage as the Joker? Like that's what you want? Like you're okay with that. You want to preserve that because they're your parents, but you won't listen to what they say, which is don't be Batman anymore. So you're making now a conscious decision that you're okay with your mom who was responsible for the killing of a child, and your dad who hates his life, and his dad's like, I'll try to carry on. You are now putting that image of your mom and dad, for as high as you held them, now become like the anti-Batman as Batman, and your mom is a psycho who lives in a glass case. You're going to preserve that instead of doing what they said, which is don't be Batman. That to me doesn't compute.
I bumped up against that. I did. And the other thing from the Flashpoint perspective was, and this kind of ties back to what I was saying with Superman, I don't know that Thomas and Martha's turnaround at the end totally tracks or
Mhm.
is
It
earned,
doesn't. It
especially
doesn't.
because with with Thomas and Dexter Dent, the entire story, he's passing Dexter off to Oswald, right? He can't be
Yeah.
bothered. The kid's
Can't be
telling
bothered.
Oswald, like, I want to learn how to shoot guns. And Oswald's like, okay. He's like, I want to learn about explosives. Okay.
Yeah.
Um,
He's like a weird Alfred.
yes. And so Bruce really wants nothing to do with this kid. And then they have this moment at the end where he realizes that, okay, if I go through with this time travel business, it will undo this young child. And I don't know. And look, again, I read it once last night. It's not like I've been sitting with this Flashpoint Beyond for a long time, like with Flashpoint. So again, I'd be curious to get other perspectives if people feel like, hey, no, that totally tracked. I get why he made the choice that he did. It didn't. And the other,
So
here's the other thing too. Going back to what we've been saying as parents, right? As fathers, it's like not to be callous towards young Dexter, but it's like if I were Thomas Wayne, again, I'd be in that time bubble. Like there's nothing that would stop me and there's nothing that would sway me.
yeah. Which is weird, right? I don't want to ruin the timeline because of this kid. Okay. Meanwhile, in the Flashpoint, you had no problem being like, everyone's going to die, and that's what's best. So now the kid is the reason why you're like, no. So you're right, it doesn't track. I wanted to, though, because I love those two. So I felt, oh, isn't that nice at the end? And then when you kind of resonate on it for a little bit, I'm like, not everybody needs a redemption arc. Like, they don't. Like, they didn't need that, especially because you weren't going anywhere with it afterwards. Like, and I think they do really well with a Batman Joker series featuring those two, not as like Martha as like basically Batgirl. Like, that's what she is. You throw a computer in there, she becomes Batgirl, or Oracle, right? But like, unless you plan on doing something with it, why did they need redemption? Like, no one was asking for that. At least in my opinion, they weren't.
So would you have been more on board with like a Batwoman-esque dynamic where you had Kate Kane and her twisted sister Alice and they're on opposite sides, something like that? Like, that could have been
Yeah.
cool.
What I honestly, again, love seeing Martha, but if Dent's wife went crazy and was hearing Martha Wayne's voice and Martha Wayne wasn't real, but because she was kind of struggling with the same stuff, and that's what she was, kind of like the Joker in the new Next Generation Batman, where like he lives in like this AI thing, I would have appreciated that more. I would
I
have
agree.
appreciated that more. I don't
I,
think you need Martha to show up at all. I think that if she's going crazy already, and because of her kid, she, people like, it's kind of like you split your personality and one of them becomes this Martha Wayne monster. I don't think she needed to be back. To me, that ruined it. Did I like seeing her? Yes. But was it necessary? No. No.
I agree. I think it took away something from that original, Night of
Yeah.
Vengeance miniseries.
Dude, it cut the balls directly off it.
And also, not for anything, but I feel like DC never met a story that they felt like a crazy wife couldn't fix, because it's like, you know going back to our earlier conversation about Identity Crisis and Gene
Yeah.
Loring's villainous turn there, and Martha Wayne certainly in the original Flashpoint, and then Gilda here, and of course I know there's precedent for Gilda, going back to the Long Halloween stories and all that, but yeah, I don't know. It's just like it feels like a bit of a trend here with the
Yeah.
crazy DC wives. Got to watch out for them, I guess.
Which I watched, I was watching this video of a black comedian, and he's like, he's like, what I'm concerned with? Gingers. He's like, because every ginger character, when they reboot them, becomes a black person. And then they went to like the Jimmy Olsen of it. And I was like, oh my God. Like, he pointed this out, dude. I was howling. I was laughing so hard because I was like, yeah, man, the gingers, as soon as the gingers go away, like when Wally West, Wally with the red hair, they made Wallace West, right? And he's a little black kid. So it was just like, yo, when he brought that up, I was like, oh my God. Yeah, it's like the shifting from one to the other, dude. I was like, man, you thought about that shit, because he named like 4 other people. They're not coming to mind right now, but I was like, oh my God, yeah, like that actually did happen.
Interesting. Kind of bringing us all full circle here. So
Yes.
I mentioned before how Flashpoint wasn't designed to do this, right? It was this Flash-centric story, but the original intention, as we're told at least, was that a timeline would be fixed, and then they decided to use it as this launching pad.
Yes.
And again, we've talked about the New 52. All I'll kind of say, and I know I'm sure I've said this before, but the frustration that I had with it, because coming out of each of these events, we usually get some level of continuity change, sometimes major, sometimes more subtle. But what was frustrating about the New 52, and the people who participated in that oral history all corroborated this. They all, they all confirmed that there was a lot of ambiguity behind the scenes. There was not this master plan as to what was in or out of continuity. And there were certain titles like Scott Snyder's Batman or Jeff Johns' Green Lantern stuff that was doing well was basically allowed to continue. And then other characters like Superman underwent these vast changes where the marriage was undone and the Kents were no longer alive, and all of this. And the creators talked about how there were characters who they were planning to use, and the ball was rolling, and then all of a sudden they were told by another editorial group, oh, like that person's not in continuity anymore, or things to that effect. And it was, I guess, it was frustrating, but also, I suppose, a form of relief hearing that from the creators, because that's always what it felt like at the time. Like, I remember all of us having these conversations at the comic shop.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was Gunverse before Gun. These people can stay. The rest of the stuff has to go
Yeah.
with
And
confusion.
exactly. And it's funny because one of our listeners, shout out to Glenn Clark at Seeking Superman on social media, but he asked recently on Twitter, he was like, he actually posed the question to Paul Kaminsky, the current editor of the Super Titles, who is a friend, but I don't think Paul responded, but Glenn was essentially saying like, what is currently, like, what is Superman's, from DC's perspective, the definitive Superman origin story? Is it Man of Steel? Is it
Oh, okay.
Birthright? Is it Secret Origin?
Yep.
And I think he also tagged the current Superman writers. To my knowledge, I don't think he got any official response.
Probably not.
And I think this points to a little bit of an issue here, where I feel like New 52 is definitely this tipping point, and I feel like we have been in a little bit of a gray zone going from New 52 to Rebirth to this current period that we're in now, where to answer Glenn's question, if I had to pin something down, I would say Geoff Johns and Gary Frank's Secret Origin, going back
Right.
to the post Infinite Crisis story, because
And
that was the story at least up until New 52,
right.
and then things were changed. But Doomsday Clock, which we'll get to, reinstated Clark's past as Superboy, which had
Yeah.
been reestablished in Secret Origin,
Yeah.
and that seemed to have this domino effect. So again, I feel like if you cornered someone from DC at a convention, don't do this. But if you did and you were like, "What's the origin?" I feel like that's what they would say.
I think the beauty of it is because so many writers have touched these characters. Some we like more than others. Some were like, that was a catastrophe. I think it lives within whichever one you want it to be. And I think that's what makes it really cool. Even if DC came out and they're like, it's this one where he was raised by plants or whatever it was, like, it doesn't have to be like that to you. It could be whatever you want it to be. Like, if we wanted to, we could take all the versions of Superman and cut them all together and make whatever version we want. And that's the beauty of having these conversations with people. Because other people, I like this one. Well, I like this one. Well, why? Right? And you can have these conversations. I don't, if they said, when they redid everything and they're like, I remember when it was New 52 or Rebirth, it was one of them, where it was like Green Lantern's first appearance, they changed to like 2012. It was like, no, we're clean swiping everything. But you don't have to believe that. Like, you could just be like, no, like, I don't want to do that. And that's, and you're well within your right to do it. Plus, speaking of which, did you read the end of the newest Action?
No, I'm not that far behind, but no, I'm not that current.
Okay, spoiler alert, but not really. More for me and you. Our boys are about to be back at it again because Lobo's, so Zarnia didn't die. Brainiac has it, a la Candor, in a bottle. So they got Lobo hooked up to something, and they kind of like peek in, and it's cool because like all the facial mocos, because it's not a mustache. It was never supposed to be. Each one of the Zarnians has these different marks, which is why in Fantaside, when he fights all his kids, they have them all over the place. So I'm like, oh man, like they're gonna bring them together again. Hopefully, like that wasn't just like a little post panel thing, but at some point they're all just gonna go ape shit on each other, which I kind of want, because that last Superman versus Lobo book really left a bad taste in my mouth.
No, I know you were not a fan. Yeah, I mean, I guess all of this is to say, especially looking at Flashpoint in the context of these Crisis events, I do feel, and I said this when we did Crisis, and I will reinstate it now. It's like when DC has these opportunities for truly a clean slate and a fresh start and a ground up rebuilding, they never take it. They never fully commit. It's always this patchwork, piecemeal approach. Because we talked about this with Crisis on Infinite Earths. I think for myself, my memory was always like, oh yeah, this was the big restart at the end of it, and it wasn't. It's like Crisis did away with the multiverse, consolidated everything, but then all of those stories that we look up as we look to as such classics like Man of Steel and Batman Year One and the George Perez on Wonder Woman, all that stuff, like that came months later here and there. It wasn't this full scale thing. And so you ended up with continuity glitches. I mean, right off the bat in Post Crisis, you stripped the Superboy portion of Clark's journey away. So that had a catastrophic effect on the Legion of Superheroes. And there's actually a story called Greatest Hero of Them All. We're going to get to that next year. We'll talk about that. And that's just one example. So it's frustrating that DC was put in put themselves in a similar position in
Yeah.
coming out of the New 52. And they even went so far as to start with all new #1. So it's like from a
Yeah.
publishing perspective, they were right where they needed to be.
Yeah.
And I think if they had just said, hey, we're starting fresh, just like, Justice League, the Justice League book was them, very
All
early
finding each
on.
other. Yeah. Or like
Yeah.
Green Lantern was chasing down Batman and stuff like that. Yeah.
But right off the bat, they had that, and they had Action Comics taking place, 5 years earlier. And then you had the rest of the books in the quote unquote present, and things weren't lining up. And again, there just seemed to be a lot of confusion because there was behind the scenes. And so the New 52, again, we've talked about it, and it's a mixed bag. I know people have their favorites. I do too. And it was an interesting time to say the least. But yeah, I mean, I think it could have been more successful. We could have still been in the New 52, I think, if they had fully committed to it.
But you're right. There was definitely some confusion. And you brought up a great point that I completely forgot about until you brought it up. At one point, they're like, none of that stuff ever existed. We're starting all over again. And then we realized that wasn't working. They started to reference stuff that technically didn't happen. And then they referenced more stuff that didn't happen. And it was just like, all right, so you tried something. And like you said, we could have still been in it, but there was no commitment. It was just kind of like, nope, we got to go back to what we know is safe. Because at one point, I think one of the articles was like, crisis didn't happen. Like that happened over here. And then like 10 issues in, they reference it. And I was like, oh, so I guess you're not like, if you're going to go all in, go all in. It's kind of like we were talking about with Gunn, right? You want to clean swipe everything, do it all. Don't bring back certain people. Don't bring back certain people as other people. Just, like put your balls on the line and see what happens. Because what's the worst that can happen? A bunch of people come in and write it back over. But like they didn't stick with it long enough. Dude, it was like 4 issues in, they started mentioning stuff that technically never happened, or at least they said didn't happen. And it was like, all right, so you had no plans to do this at all.
Yeah, look, like I've said before, if they had just made this a separate imprint a la Ultimate, I think they could have solved a lot of problems and just done that fresh start. And then in success, if this thing really blew up, eventually it could just overtake the main line. But look, it's easy to look back and say they should have done this. It is what it is. But
of course,
in any event, kind of in terms of where we are now, it definitely seems like there is some level of intent from DC to continue telling stories with the Flashpoint characters.
I'm telling you, the new writers, the new runs, I'm more into DC books than I am into Marvel stuff. The stories are so good. Dude, that Ram V Cat, he could write his ass off. Like, he's almost poetically prose. He's great, man. I'm telling you, a bunch of that stuff is really good. Even the stuff you don't expect to be good. You're just like, God damn, like, that's really good. But I like the direction that everything's going in now. I thought Night Terrors was a giant hit, man. It was awesome. And now they have all this like new #1s and like all this other stuff. Like that's fine because like at this point I don't care. But now it just seems like they're really putting strong backing behind and like newer ideas behind like a lot of the teams and stuff like that. So I'm digging where it's going. By the way, totally side question. Is it just fate that is giving you the Kingdom Come Superman Gray on the side, or are you doing something? Like, I got to know, because you're such a Superman dude. I'm assuming that all this you made happen, but because you're such a Superman dude, I think it's just happening to you, and it couldn't happen to a better person.
Yeah, maybe I'm manifesting it, or it's just the ravages of time.
It looks great, man, dude.
The pandemic
awesome.
And fatherhood and all that stuff. We'll see. But as far as, but yeah, no, it definitely seems like DC has some good momentum going, and I'm happy for that. And again, I know we've talked about the divine continuum and everything, and there's a big part of me that's like, okay, I feel like this is a little silly and it's a little bit much, and who is this really serving here? But at the same time, when we talked about 0 Hour and Hypertime, I talked about how I really love the concept of Hypertime, and I thought it was a real neat, clean way to just sort of account for all of these various timelines and versions of characters. If nothing else, I guess I do appreciate that the concept and the term have been brought back. Right? It's the representation of this entire side of the divine continuum, right? So we have time and we have space and we have the omniverse and we have hypertime. And also, I don't know that this was even necessarily, this was at least alluded to, if not explicitly said, by, Dr. Baxter on the news program with Mr. Terrific, that essentially we have categories of crises. We have the multiverse or the omniverse crises, where we're dealing with multiverse expanding or contracting, and we have these hypertime crises like 0 Hour and like Flashpoint. So I don't know, the idea that they're being classified in that way.
Yeah, they're trying to categorize them. Yeah, it's like, look, I think it's cool because it seems like they're trying to take it out of a mishmash of shit, which is great. Um, but again, it's a lot. It's like you said, it's like it's a lot to be like, all right, I guess so. But in reality, it's not going to really change the way that we enjoy the books anyway. Like we might like gripe about stuff, but ultimately, it's not going to stop me from reading it, even if I think the idea is stupid or not. I'm still going to keep reading because it's ultimately it's the stories that you enjoy anyway.
Last two things about Flashpoint, and then we'll sign off here. The original Flashpoint. At the end of the
Yes,
story, again, Barry brings this letter to Bruce in the Batcave, and it's a beautiful moment. And probably God,
it
Bruce
really
even
is.
tears up, and it's like
Yep.
it's a conversation, so to speak, but hearing from his father. That I love. The one thing though, tell me if this made sense for you. The notion that Bruce would sort of give Barry a pass. Because Barry's like, I changed time. Like, all
Hmm.
these people died. And Bruce is basically says to him, I understand. It's okay. I've
Yeah.
thought about time travel too. I mean, on the one hand, yes, of course, Bruce can identify. And actually, with the button, one of the things that I really did enjoy with that was showing how Bruce and Barry were really on the same wavelength and
Yeah.
talking
Yeah.
forensics and talking investigation. I thought that
And
was
like
cool.
literally grabbing onto his back so he can like ride the wave on like the treadmill. I thought that was really cool too. It made him like a sidekick in a weird way.
Yeah. But did you feel Bruce was too forgiving? Or were you like, no,
Yeah.
I understand? Yeah.
No, no, no. I think depends on what writer you like, right? Because again, he gave him a pass for screwing up all that stuff, but he's mad now at Catwoman and his entire Bat family because crime is going down. Like, where are your priorities, dude? You know what I'm saying? Like, you got that pet. Why? Because your dad was involved, right? So you get a pass from this, but streets are now cleaner and you got a problem with that. Like, I want to know where his gauge of like what the importance of things are. But I guess you have to do that, right? Like, it wouldn't make any sense. He's like, no, F you. And they start fighting. It's just like, like you got to put a tail end on it anyway. And it just seems like if Batman agrees to something, everyone goes, oh, it's okay now. He's kind of like the weight.
And we had just a few years earlier been down this road of the distrust between them with all the identity crisis, mind wipe business. So
Yep.
I guess this works well enough. I don't know. In fairness, too, the Bruce he talks to at the end of Flashpoint is the new 52 Batman, the younger,
Yeah. Yeah.
tweaked
Yeah.
version of the character. So
Yes.
maybe that accounts for some of it too. And this is the last thing because I not to harp on the changes to Barry's origin, but I think this is the other thing that kind of I always bump up against with that is like you, right? Wally is my Flash. And one of the things that was always cool about Wally was there was just this energy, this humor, this a little bit
Yeah.
of a reverence to
Yep.
the character. And with Barry, it's like, okay, already this is going to take a little getting used to, right? My
Hmm.
Flash is not the guy anymore.
Right.
But saddling Barry with this lifetime of time travel assaults from Professor
Yeah.
Zoom or from
Yep.
Reverse Flash is just like, again, not that Barry became so overly grim or glum or dour, but it was more in that category, right?
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
feel
He's
like
Bat Barry.
it just
Yeah.
like weighed Barry down where it was already going to be an adjustment from Wally. And I don't know. I guess the counter argument is,
Yeah.
hey, if you didn't have that, he might feel too much like Wally. So I get wanting
Yeah.
to distinguish the characters, but I think that was always a little bit of it for me as well.
Yeah. I don't know. It seems like as soon as you take someone's attitude and you change it, it's like the surefire way to re-kickstart something. So it's just like now you got a serious one. Next it'll be a funny one. And I don't know. It's like you got. I mean, we're talking about it as like fans of the medium, right? But like there's people sitting in offices going, these numbers are down. This is going on. These people need to. These short stores are closed. Which I found out anything from Sean Hendricks, like 4 of the local biggest shops in like New Jersey are closing their doors. Man, like people aren't. So now it has to be dynamic stuff. It's got to be dynamic stuff. Like if you throw look, if you're a fisherman, you throw one lure into the water, you might have to wait. If you got 75 of them in there, you're going to catch something faster. I think that's what it is. Like, let's just throw as much stuff in there and we'll see what sticks. And a lot of changes have to happen to do that. And it changes our perspective on stuff. But ultimately, it's about us because we're reading them, but it's about new people too, because we're always going to get it. But it
Yeah.
seems like with the amount of stores that's shutting down, that's not even going to happen.
No, I know. No, for sure. Well, that was Flashpoint. Again, was ultimately used as this crisis level event, not
Starting level,
originally
yeah.
conceived as it. And I
Yep.
think, as I was reading it, one of the things just on a logistical note, it's like it was only 5 issues. right? I mean, that's 0 hour. That's 0 hour territory. So it was
Meanwhile, the
pretty short.
compendium, because I was going to get it, and it turns out I had the stuff that we needed anyway pretty on hand. It is this big, dude. It's this big.
This
But the
has all
main
the miniseries and
storyline,
stuff.
yeah, the main storyline, like it's a mini series, man. It's a mini series, but they dipped into everything. They got Frankenstein in there. They had everybody in there. And it was just like, it seems bigger than what it was. And maybe that's why. Maybe that was never the plan in the first place. But now they're like, all right, we got to fill some shelves. So give me a Canterbury Cricket story. Give me a Booster Gold story. Give me this one story. At that point, you have to do that because you can't just do 6 issues and then be like, everything's changed. You got to make it this big event.
I always wonder what this story might have looked like in terms of issue count, in terms of story, if they had known this was the road to a quasi reboot, right?
Yeah.
I can't go full reboot because it wasn't, but it was close to one.
Yeah.
Like I just wonder, and I wonder, one of the things that has always bugged me about the New 52 is that we didn't get a proper farewell to the post-crisis versions of the characters. I just wonder if this had been planned out further in advance and they knew where they were going with it.
What would it be like?
If it might have played out differently, and if the New 52 might have been more palatable because you had more of a send-off for the previous versions. But we'll never know.
I think to use a teaching term, I know it's used other places. I think if you had it in mind and you backwards planned it the right way, I think it would have been a more enjoyable run. Like, if it lived as something this small and they're like, whoa, by the way, we got a springboard to this other thing, you're going to get the best of what they can give you at the time. I think if you laid it all out and you're like, this is where we want to end. This is what we're going to start with. What can we actually do to make it, seem like all the pieces are there for a reason and not just a couple books thrown in there for no reason? I think you would have enjoyed it a little bit more. I mean, I liked it. It was great. It was a great read, dude. But I think if it was planned properly, of course it would have been better. Of course it would have been better.
Yeah.
But I guess we'll never know unless you want to write one.
Well, listen, DC, I'm here.
For real. Like, come on, man. Can we give my man some love? Jesus Christ.
All right. So that was Flashpoint and Flashpoint Beyond. Next week for Chapter 10, we'll be hitting Dark Knight's Metal. It will be my first reading of this. We'll see how it goes. I'm sure it'll be a fun conversation either way. I encourage everyone to follow Justin on Instagram at Real Life Lobo. Is there anything else you want to plug or direct people to?
No, I'm getting married and you're awesome. That's pretty much the only 2 things I got right now. And Sarah is like, she's being so like, I text her, I'm like, we're wrapping up. We're wrapping because she still has schoolwork to do. And she's so like, dude, look, shout out to anyone. It's like you said, the wives, dude, the wives, the husbands and stuff. Cause like, she knows she's got stuff to do. She hasn't texted me once. She hasn't been like, hey, can you wrap it up? Cause she knows how important this is. And you got to give love to someone who understands your stuff that much. So yeah, look, if I'm going to shout out anyone, it was Elam, the guy who does the custom shoes, and my future wife to be in like another, couple days, couple weeks or whatever. So we appreciate that.
Very nice. Well, congratulations on the impending nuptials. So happy for you. Thank you for joining me for this. It was a lot of fun. And, you're the Flashpoint guy. I know you love this world. So it was great to get your take on everything.
Yeah.
Audience, thank you. As always, I really appreciate you tuning in. We're nearing the end of this event. I'm actually getting a little sad. Going into this, I'm like, this is going to be so much work. But I've actually had a lot of fun with it. So we still have a few more chapters to go. Keep tuning in. And, of course, as always, it's about what you do. It's about action. This show is part of the Flat Squirrel Podcast Network, home to Digging for Kryptonite, another exciting episode in the adventures of Superman, Summoning the Zords, and My Comic Shop History, available wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to subscribe and leave a review today. Sign up at patreon.com/Anthony Desiato for additional content. Thank you all.